What would you do if your family didn't accept the love of your life? Sophia sighed as she adjusted the last orchid vase on the shelf by the entrance. The evening light was already filtering through the windows, casting a soft orange hue over the small flower shop. To her, Bloom and Bliss was more than just a workplace. It was her passion, her refuge amidst the chaos of New York, where she could immerse herself in a peace few understood. This flower shop had been opened 4 years ago through hard work and sacrifice. She had labored tirelessly to win over each customer and every bit of praise, always grateful for the small successes the shop brought. Her mother had always encouraged her to pursue her dreams, and this place was a tribute to her. In a way, taking care of the flowers was her way of keeping part of her family alive. When the bell above the door chimed, Sophia was already holding a cup of tea, ready to relax after a long, exhausting day. She glanced at the clock on the wall. 6:58. The official closing time had passed 2 minutes ago, but she could still serve one last customer. Raising her gaze, she found herself looking at a tall man who seemed out of place among the delicate, colorful flowers. He wore an expensive, stylish suit, clearly not something found in regular stores, and the way he held a black leather briefcase radiated a cold, calculated confidence. Sophia felt the energy in the air shift as he entered. The man slowly removed his sunglasses, revealing penetrating, intense eyes that scanned the place with an expression almost of disdain. He seemed to assess every detail as if he were in a corporate meeting, not a charming flower shop. "Are you the one in charge here?" he asked bluntly, his voice firm and sharp. It wasn't a casual question, but a disguised command, almost as if expecting her to feel intimidated. Sophia lifted her chin, surprised by the rude tone, but she forced a polite smile. She was used to dealing with different types of clients, but this one seemed to require extra patience. "Yes, I'm the owner and manager of Bloom and Bliss," she replied with restrained kindness. "How can I help you?" He looked her up and down, as if trying to decipher or measure her worth. This irritated Sophia further, but she maintained her composure. After all, he was a customer, and with a bit of luck, he'd place his order and leave quickly. "I need a bouquet," he began, pausing as he cast a critical eye over the flowers around him, as if trying to find something up to his standards. "Something simple and quick. My time is valuable." The way he pronounced simple and quick nearly made Sophia lose her smile. She took a deep breath, attempting to control the irritation starting to build. She already had a retort on the tip of her tongue but chose to hold it back. "All right, mister." She hesitated, waiting for him to complete with his name, though she was far from appearing interested. He seemed to notice her expectation and lifted his head, almost as if this were a waste of his time. "Lancaster. Thomas Lancaster," he said with a slight raise of his eyebrows, as if his name were a definitive business card. She knew who he was. In fact, anyone who read business headlines or had minimal contact with the financial world would have heard of Thomas Lancaster, the ruthless CEO of Lancaster Enterprises, one of the largest holding companies in the United States. He was infamous for being relentless in business, someone who did what it took to win, without scruples, without hesitation. Sophia swallowed back the urge to deliver a sharp response, and instead opened the order pad in her hand. "Mr. Lancaster, we work with a personalized concept where each bouquet conveys a unique message. So if you could tell me more about the occasion." I'm not here to discuss concepts," he interrupted, giving her an impatient look. "Just do what I'm asking and give me an adequate bouquet." She felt her face warm with irritation. Thomas spoke as if she were there only to follow his orders, with no right to voice an opinion. Sophia approached the counter and forced a smile with an ironic politeness, striving to maintain professionalism. "Sorry, but adequate is a bit vague, Mr. Lancaster. I need to understand the message you wish to convey with the flowers. Our job is not just to make a bouquet, it's to ensure that each chosen flower transmits the desired intent." He raised an eyebrow as if he couldn't believe a mere florist would dare question him. "Look, I don't need this. I just want you to do the job I'm paying for, nothing more." She stared at him, determined not to back down. There was something intransigent about him, But Sophia wasn't going to let him devalue what she did with so much love. It would be easy to just accept the money and make any bouquet, but that would go against everything she believed in. "Perhaps you should go to another flower shop," she said, in a light tone hiding undeniable firmness. "Here, each bouquet carries a story, and it seems you're not looking for a story, only a transaction." Thomas was silent for a moment, clearly surprised by her audacity. Few people have the courage to confront him, and he seemed to be deciding if that attitude was irritating or intriguing. "Listen, miss." He stepped closer, placing his hands on the counter and narrowing the distance between them, in a clear attempt to intimidate her. "I don't know if you realize who I am, but..." Sophia didn't let him finish. "I know exactly who you are," she replied without blinking, "and that doesn't impress me. Here, I treat everyone with the same respect, regardless of name or status." He stepped back, examining her with cold eyes, but a small smile began to form on his lips. It seemed that, for the first time, someone dared to challenge his presence and show that his power didn't matter. And at the same time, he felt a twinge of respect for her courage, something he wouldn't admit out loud. "Very well, miss," he said, putting on his sunglasses again in a calculated gesture, as if ending the conversation. "I'll be back to see if your work is really worth it." Sophia watched as he left the flower shop, still unable to believe the audacity of that man. But as the door closed, a strange feeling washed over her. It was as if something significant had happened there, something she couldn't yet explain. She looked at the flowers around her, feeling that Thomas Lancaster's visit was only the beginning of a storm about to come. The doorbell stopped swinging, but her heart was still racing. She didn't know it yet, but that encounter would mark the beginning of an irreversible change in her life. The next morning, Sophia arrived at the flower shop with bittersweet feelings about the previous day. Although she doubted Thomas Lancaster would ever return, the thought of him possibly doing so unsettled her. His arrogant manner and the disdain he had shown for her passion deeply irritated her. Yet something about that encounter left her feeling restless. It was as if he represented a kind of challenge she'd never anticipated. A man who tested both her patience and her determination. She was at the counter arranging a special order when she heard the sound of a powerful car engine pulling up outside the shop. Through the window's reflection, she saw a sleek black sedan pull up right at the entrance, and her heart skipped slightly. Within seconds, the shop door opened, and he entered again like a storm. "I see you're open for business," Thomas said, giving her a firm, confident look, as if he owned the place. Sophia took a deep breath, remaining calm. "Good morning to you too," she replied, with a hint of sarcasm in her voice. "I see you decided to come back, even after yesterday." He ignored the remark and wandered around the shop, looking at the flowers and plants as though he were analyzing a stock purchase. He seemed more interested in the environment itself than in any of the flowers. After a few moments in silence, he turned to her with a decided expression. "Yesterday, you mentioned something about flowers carrying meanings," he said, crossing his arms and tilting his head slightly, as if analyzing a thesis rather than a bouquet. "I don't see the point. A bouquet is just a bunch of flowers, right?" Sophia almost laughed. Such a cold and practical view of what she considered an art was typical of someone who'd never needed to give meaning to the small things in life. For her, the right arrangement of flowers was like writing a letter with colors and shapes, a pure expression of feelings. But she realized Thomas would never grasp that concept, so she decided to explain directly. "It's not just a bunch of flowers, Mr. Lancaster," she began, her voice firm yet gentle. "Each flower has a meaning, a story. We don't select flowers randomly. The type, color, and even the arrangement all serve a purpose." He raised his eyebrows, surprised by the passion in her voice. "Then explain the meaning of what you're holding there," he said, pointing to the arrangement she was finishing. She looked at the bouquet in her hands and felt a small sense of pride. It was a special request from a client wanting to regain someone's trust. The bouquet was full of lavender-colored flowers and white roses. "This arrangement is meant to convey sincerity and peace," she explained, carefully holding the bouquet. "The white roses symbolize purity and honesty, while lavender represents calmness and respect. A bouquet like this speaks of reconciliation and trust." For a brief moment, Thomas appeared intrigued, though he quickly masked any admiration that might have arisen. "That's interesting, but not practical for someone busy," he said with a shrug, as if trying to hide even the slightest interest her explanation had stirred. "I need something for tonight's event. A launch of one of my companies. No sentiment, just something eye-catching." Sophia suppressed a sarcastic smile. He still didn't understand that even the simplest bouquet carried a message, no matter how little he cared about it. "For you," she said, focusing back on her work, "I would make an arrangement with lily and yellow tulips." Thomas frowned. "Yellow? Isn't that too vibrant?" She looked up with a faint smile. "Exactly. Yellow represents joy, energy, and success. Mr. Lancaster, it's like you slightly over the top, a bit aggressive, but still imposing." She paused for a moment, debating whether to be honest, but decided to take the risk. "And besides, yellow tulips often symbolize an apology." He looked at her in surprise, and she knew he understood the message. Deep down, she hoped he'd at least recognize that his attitude the day before had been disrespectful. However, instead of apologizing, Thomas merely glanced away, as if avoiding direct confrontation. "I think you're taking this too personally," he replied after a brief pause, trying to mask his discomfort with arrogance. "This is just business, nothing more." Sophia felt her face warm at the remark. She knew that, in his world, business was impersonal, something treated with coldness and distance. But to her, working with flowers was like touching people's emotions, a reminder that life was made of delicate and fleeting moments, just like flowers. "Maybe for you," she replied, with a colder tone than she intended. "But for me, it's something much deeper. I'm not here just to sell flowers. I'm here to do something meaningful." Thomas watched her, uncertain of how to respond to her unexpected sincerity. For a moment, he seemed less confident, almost vulnerable, but he quickly regained his firm stance. "Very well," he said, pulling out his wallet. "Let's see what you can do that's meaningful for me." He took out a gold credit card, extending it to her with the same haughty expression. Sophia accepted the payment, but her eyes remained fixed on his. There was something in Thomas's eyes that intrigued her, as if he hid a deeper layer beyond the arrogant and successful exterior he displayed. Sophia began preparing the arrangement, carefully selecting the lily and tulips, adding a touch of elegant foliage to give volume and highlight the vibrant colors. As she worked, she felt Thomas's eyes observing her every move, almost as if he were trying to understand the essence of what she was doing. Yet he remained silent, seemingly lost in his own thoughts. After a few minutes, she handed him the finished arrangement. Thomas held it with a mixture of caution and curiosity, as if it were a rare object. "It's satisfactory," he commented, hesitant to admit he liked the result. Sophia suppressed a smile. She knew he'd never openly admit she had impressed him, but the fact that he had returned and valued her work was already a victory. "I'm glad you liked it, Mr. Lancaster," she said, professionally. He took a step toward the door, but before leaving, he turned to her with an expression that mixed disdain and challenge. "I liked it enough to consider returning, Miss Wilson." "Sophia Wilson." Thomas simply nodded, as if memorizing her name like a promising new investment. Then he left the shop, leaving behind a strange sensation, a mix of curiosity and frustration that disturbed both her mind and his. As soon as the door closed, Sophia sighed in relief but also in anticipation. She couldn't explain why, but something about Thomas left her unsettled. He was like a storm waiting to break, and she didn't want to be the one he'd strike when the time came. Still, she couldn't avoid thinking about that brief moment of vulnerability he'd shown. That night, as she closed the shop and walked through the streets of New York toward her small apartment, Sophia felt strangely restless. The encounter with Thomas had planted a seed of doubt, something she wasn't quite sure how to define. He irritated her deeply, but he also did something more. He challenged the very core of who she was. Upon entering her home and kicking off her shoes, she let herself sink onto the couch, looking at the ceiling and trying to process what it all meant. She knew that wouldn't be the last encounter between them. She knew, in some way, Thomas would cross her path again. Whether because of his attraction to challenges or a curiosity he would never admit to having. While the building lights shone around her, Sophia tried to quiet the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. Something about the encounter with Thomas had stirred a mix of unease and curiosity within her. He was someone so opposite to everything she valued. Yet his presence had the power to turn her routine upside down. Somehow she knew that encounter was no coincidence, but a collision of worlds that might just be beginning. A part of Sophia wanted to believe that was the last chapter of her interactions with Thomas Lancaster. But deep down, she sensed he would return in some way. She just didn't know when. On the opposite side of the city, Thomas couldn't shake the memory of that florist who had dared to defy him. He could barely recall anyone confronting him so directly in years. And the fact that she had refused his money and demanded respect sparked an interest bordering on irritation. There was something about Sophia Wilson that defied his unyielding logic. As he looked at the bouquet she had crafted resting on his glass table, he felt a pang of discomfort. It was a strange feeling for someone so secure in his actions. To Thomas, everything had a purpose, a precise reason, and any kind of emotional vulnerability was a sign of weakness. But Sophia was different. She seemed stronger than he had expected, and that intrigued him. And so, as both tried to convince themselves they wouldn't be affected by that intense and unexpected exchange, an invisible connection began to form between them, a connection that, although they refused to admit it, had already started to shape their destinies. It was a busy Friday at Bloom & Bliss. Immersed in orders and arrangements, Sophia felt energized. Time passed quickly when she was working, and while the exhaustion was inevitable, the joy of creating arrangements for happy clients made her forget the difficulties of running a small business, at least until she heard the unmistakable sound of the doorbell. Her heart raced as she looked up and saw Thomas Lancaster entering once more, carrying that same proud and confident expression, as if it were the last place he'd want to be. But something was different in his demeanor, a seriousness that made her hold her breath for a second. This wasn't just another arrogant visit. He had a clear purpose. Thomas stood still, watching her from across the counter with narrowed eyes, and for the first time, he seemed to hesitate before speaking. "Mr. Lancaster." Sophia greeted him curtly, straightening her shoulders. "You returned faster than I expected." She couldn't hide the ironic tone, but she doubted he would even notice. He seemed more tense than usual and pulled a small, wilted flower from his pocket, wrapped in a piece of paper. He extended it toward her with a restrained, almost uncomfortable expression. "I found this in the bouquet you prepared," he said, his voice stiff. "I'm not sure if it was an error or oversight on your part, but I thought it should be mentioned." Sophia took the flower and examined it for a moment. It was a red hibiscus, wilted with almost crumbling petals. She was certain it hadn't been part of Thomas's arrangement. Every flower had been carefully checked before she delivered the bouquet. She looked at him, intrigued. "This wasn't in the arrangement I prepared, Mr. Lancaster." "I'm certain," she replied calmly, trying to understand why he had brought back something so small and seemingly insignificant, especially him who appeared to disregard such details. He glanced away briefly, as if reconsidering what he was about to say, and that only heightened Sophia's curiosity. "I suppose I need to apologize," he said reluctantly, his face hard. "I was rude, I admit, and I brought this flower to you as a reminder. I thought it was the kind of thing that might mean something to you. After all, you're the expert here." Sophia blinked, surprised. She never expected Thomas to apologize, let alone using a metaphor she valued so much. For the first time, he seemed genuine, someone beyond the arrogant CEO mask he always wore. She took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "I appreciate the apology, Mr. Lancaster," she said softly. And indeed, a wilted flower represents something neglected, perhaps a moment that could have been handled more delicately. Thomas nodded, seeming to understand more than she'd expected. Sophia felt strangely vulnerable, as if that subtle dialogue revealed more than she wanted to admit. But before she could get lost in her thoughts, he cleared his throat, breaking the moment. "In fact, I also came back to make a proposal," he said, regaining his serious professional tone. "I have a gala event tomorrow night, and I'd like you to handle the main arrangement. Something grand, something that makes a statement, something that, let's say, symbolizes the sophistication of Lancaster Enterprises." Sophia looked at him, trying not to show her surprise. The request was unexpected and, in a way, even challenging. She knew he didn't trust easily, much less in someone he deemed beneath him. But there was something more to that invitation. A veiled challenge, as if he were testing her. "I can do that," she finally replied. "But before accepting, I need to understand the message you want to convey. After all, we're talking about a Lancaster Enterprises event, so it shouldn't be simple and quick, right?" Thomas gave a half smile, a bit surprised and even pleased with her response. "Exactly. I want something that represents power, sophistication, and exclusivity," he said, his voice taking on an intriguing tone, almost as if he were confessing something. "But I also want it to have a personal essence, something that makes a statement without being obvious, like a mark of authenticity." Sophia reflected on the request. Power, sophistication, and exclusivity were predictable words for a CEO like Thomas, but the personal touch was surprising. What did he mean by that? Was there something else he wanted to express beyond the corporate facade? "Understood. I'll create something special," she promised, accepting the challenge with a sparkle in her eyes. Thomas watched her with an enigmatic expression, as if he wanted to say more, but instead, he simply nodded, professionalism back in place. "Then it's settled. I'll send a driver to pick you up tomorrow at 5. I want to ensure you have everything you need to prepare the arrangement on site." Sophia hesitated. Working on site was unusual. Typically, she prepared the arrangements at the flower shop and simply delivered them to the event. But apparently, Thomas had other ideas. "Very well, Mr. Lancaster. I'll be ready," she agreed, curious about what awaited her. He gave a brief, approving smile before saying goodbye, leaving her intrigued. For the first time, Sophia felt that something different had been established between them. Something that went beyond a simple professional request. She knew she couldn't back down now, as Thomas himself seemed to be giving her an opportunity to showcase her art in a new environment, with the full potential to stand out. As she watched Thomas leave the shop, Sophia began planning the arrangement, already thinking of the flowers that would best capture the essence of his request. She wanted something grand, yes, but she also wanted to surprise him with the same force he had impressed upon her since their first meeting. That night, in her small apartment, Sophia made a list of flowers that would convey strength and sophistication: rare orchids, lush peonies, and touches of deep green foliage. She felt inspired in a way she couldn't explain. The challenge fueled her, and she wanted to create something that would show Thomas that Bloom and Bliss was no ordinary flower shop. She wanted him to understand the passion she poured into her work and perhaps feel a bit of the same emotion that flowers stirred in her. The next day, she was ready and excited, waiting for the driver Thomas would send. When the car arrived, she was impressed by the elegance of the vehicle and the professional treatment. In less than half an hour, she stood in front of a luxurious building on the Upper East Side, where the Lancaster Enterprises event would take place. In the event hall, as she assembled the arrangement, she felt the weight of several people's gazes. Executives and assistants watched her curiously, as if questioning why Thomas Lancaster had entrusted such an important task to a florist who clearly didn't belong to the same circle of power. As she placed the final flower in the arrangement, she heard footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Thomas standing beside her, hands in his pockets, with an approving expression. He observed the arrangement, and Sophia could see he was genuinely impressed. "It's magnificent," he said, surprising her with the sincerity in his voice. "I don't think I've ever seen anything like it." It was a simple compliment, but for Sophia, it was all she needed to hear. She smiled, feeling triumphant. "I'm glad you liked it, Mr. Lancaster. This is what happens when you work with dedication and meaning. Perhaps now you understand what I meant about flowers carrying a message." Thomas looked at her with an intensity she hadn't expected, and for the first time, she felt that a barrier between them was beginning to fade. Perhaps he was really starting to understand what it meant to put something personal into one's work, but he seemed reluctant to admit it. As the evening progressed, Sophia stood discreetly on the edge of the hall, watching people's reactions to the arrangement she'd prepared. The flowers exuded an unmistakable elegance, each detail conveying precisely what Thomas had requested: power, sophistication, and, to her own pride, an authenticity that reflected her work. Around her, elegantly dressed men and women mingled with glasses of champagne, engaged in conversations about business and investments. She'd never felt more out of place, yet at the same time, there was a growing sense of satisfaction. Seeing that touch of nature transform such a rigid and impersonal event gave her a sense of victory. Her art was there, visible to all, even those who ignored it. When the guests began praising the arrangement, Sophia noticed Thomas observing them intently. He seemed satisfied, but there was something deeper in his gaze, as if he saw in that arrangement more than just a decoration. It was as if, for a brief moment, he felt pride in the choice he'd made in hiring her. At the end of the event, Thomas approached Sophia, looking at her with a mix of approval and curiosity. "It seems you really know how to impress," he said in a low voice, so only she could hear. The guests commented on the arrangement all evening. "I'm glad it met your expectations, Mr. Lancaster," she replied, maintaining formality, though there was a glint of satisfaction in her eyes. He chuckled softly, something she'd never imagined hearing. "I don't know why, but I feel you have much more to offer than just flowers, Sophia," he said, for the first time calling her by name. "Someone like you, with that vision, has a strength many lack. You seem to see beyond appearances." She looked at him, surprised by the almost vulnerable tone he'd assumed. Thomas wasn't the type to let down his guard, but at that moment, she sensed a spark of humanity he tried to hide. He seemed genuinely interested in understanding who she was. "I think seeing beyond appearances is something we should all do," she replied, her tone soft but firm. "Life becomes a bit more interesting when we try to see what lies beneath first impressions." He remained silent, absorbing her words, and Sophia felt that this was a rare moment where the barrier between them seemed almost invisible. However, Thomas's expression soon hardened again, and he resumed his impassive CEO demeanor. "Maybe you're right," he murmured, looking away. "Well, I'm glad you came and did this work. I believe this won't be the last time we'll work together." She nodded, maintaining a professional stance. "I'll be available, Mr. Lancaster." "It was a pleasure." He hesitated for a brief moment, as if wanting to say something more, but soon he bid farewell and returned to the hall, where the last guests were still talking. Sophia felt a strange sensation watching him leave, as if something important had been left unsaid between them. That night, as she left the building and headed home, Sophia realized there was much more to Thomas Lancaster than the ruthless man he showed the world. And as much as she wanted to deny it, she knew that her fate was, in some way, tied to his, a collision of opposites that seemed to grow stronger with each new encounter. As the city lights guided her way back, Sophia knew that, like her flowers, that relationship carried an invisible message, a message yet to bloom. For Sophia, the days following the event were marked by a mix of restlessness and relief. Thomas's request had been a success, and she should have felt satisfied, like any professional after completing such a challenging task. But the truth was that since that night, Thomas Lancaster had occupied her thoughts in an annoyingly constant way. He was a persistent reminder, like a song that echoes even when you try to forget it. Thomas seemed to have an unusual effect on her, a dangerous combination of fascination and frustration. The way he alternated between arrogance and vulnerability unsettled her, as if he were hiding something behind his controlled facade. She struggled against the urge to know him more deeply, knowing it would be unwise to get close to someone like him. He was a successful CEO with a life completely different from hers, a reality built on control and power. The small flower shop, on the other hand, offered Sophia a simple but precious refuge. It was there, among plants and flowers, that she felt safest. But as she was arranging the counter on a sunny afternoon, Sophia was once again surprised by the unmistakable sound of the doorbell. Looking up, she found Thomas standing in the doorway, watching her with a slight smile. This time, he seemed more relaxed, as if he were there for a different reason than before. "Mr. Lancaster here again?" she asked, trying to keep her tone neutral. He shrugged, walking closer with measured steps, his gaze fixed on her. "It seems your flower shop has become my refuge of normalcy," he replied, letting out a soft laugh. "This is one of the few places where no one tries to impress or flatter. It's Refreshing. Sophia raised her eyebrows, surprised by his admission. And here I thought the word normalcy wasn't in your vocabulary, she replied, slightly sarcastic. Thomas chuckled, a low, discreet laugh that seemed unexpected even to him. He then looked around, as if trying to see the shop through her perspective. Maybe you're right, but lately, I've been wondering if being surrounded by luxury and perfection has made me forget what is simple and genuine. Sophia watched him, surprised by the hint of vulnerability in his words. For a moment, she saw a version of Thomas that seemed a little more human, someone who might be tired of his luxurious, controlled life. He averted his gaze, as if realizing he was revealing more than he intended. Anyway, he said, quickly returning to a professional tone, I came here for a specific reason. I have a new work proposal. Sophia sighed, unable to resist her curiosity. I'm listening. What would the next project be, Mr. Lancaster? An important corporate dinner at my own house, he replied in a casual tone, but with a hint of hesitation. I want something special for the decor, something that makes the place feel welcoming yet impressive. Sophia was silent, considering the proposal. It was rare for a CEO to open his personal residence for a corporate event, and the fact that he was entrusting her with this task felt almost intimate. Still, she didn't want to show any hesitation. I can do that, she responded firmly. If you allow me a bit more creative freedom, I can create an atmosphere that is sophisticated, but also has a human touch. Thomas watched her, intrigued. He seemed to admire how she defended her craft and in some way understood that she saw flowers in a unique way, something he had never considered. Creative freedom, he repeated, a challenging smile forming on his lips. It seems you like to test my limits, Miss Wilson. Just enough to keep the job interesting, Mr. Lancaster, she replied, returning his smile with a touch of irony. He nodded, as if appreciating her response. Very well. I'll trust you to impress my guests, and perhaps even me. As they discussed the event details, Sophia sensed a subtle shift in how he looked at her. It was as if he were studying her reactions, searching for something he couldn't quite define. And by the end of their conversation, when he finally said goodbye, she felt that this encounter had left more questions than answers. In the following days, Sophia worked tirelessly on the project. She was determined to show she could bring the human touch Thomas had said he wanted. She imagined what his house might be like, probably luxurious, modern, and impersonal, with each detail meticulously chosen to impress. She decided then that the decor should soften the space, making it more inviting. She selected warmer toned flowers and textures that would bring a sense of coziness without losing sophistication. On the day of the event, a driver came to pick her up at the flower shop. As before, Sophia carried with her all the flowers she'd chosen, along with vases and details she planned to arrange directly on site. When the car finally arrived at Thomas Lancaster's imposing residence, she felt a chill as she took in the mansion. It was a luxurious property, but devoid of life, as if every piece of furniture had been chosen more to impress than to make one feel at home. As soon as she entered, she was led to a large room where Thomas awaited her. He was surveying the space, but upon seeing her arrive, he approached with a smile more open than before. Miss Wilson, he greeted her. I hope you're ready to impress. That's the idea, she replied, glancing around the room. But I must admit, your home is more intimidating than I imagined. He laughed, and for the first time, Sophia felt he relaxed in his own home, as if her presence made him less rigid. Intimidating? I don't think anyone has described my home that way. He shook his head, amused. Maybe it's a sign it needs more life. Sophia began setting up the decor, and Thomas stayed nearby, observing her closely. He seemed genuinely curious about the process, making her wonder if, in fact, he sought something more than just a job. He watched each choice she made, from the arrangement of flowers to the way she combined them to transform the cold atmosphere of the room into something far more welcoming. Do you enjoy watching the process, don't you? She remarked, noticing his attentive gaze. I'm just trying to understand what goes on in your mind, Miss Wilson, he said casually, though there was a touch of genuine curiosity. I admit, I'm surprised by the results so far. As she worked, Sophia felt it was one of the strangest and most intense moments she'd ever experienced. There she was, in the house of one of the most powerful, unreachable men in the city, yet he seemed interested in every detail she was creating. It was as if he were searching for a way to connect with something real, something his materialistic world couldn't offer. Finally, when the last detail was in place, Thomas approached her, his eyes shining with a mix of admiration and surprise. "You managed to transform my house into something I almost don't recognize," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "It's magnificent." Sophia felt her cheeks warm at the compliment, but she held her ground. "I think a little color and life make any space feel more human. Maybe that's the difference." Thomas remained silent, but his expression spoke more than he would ever admit. Sophia felt the weight of his gaze, and for the first time, she realized she was more involved than she wanted to be. Something inside her whispered that this man, so inaccessible and arrogant, hid a pain or emptiness she couldn't yet understand. Perhaps the luxury surrounding him was a way of shielding himself from something deeper. Before she could think further, the sound of approaching voices signaled the arrival of guests, and Thomas quickly regained his firm, CEO posture. "Thank you, Sophia," he said with a slightly more distant tone. "I'm sure tonight will be a success, largely thanks to your work." Before she could respond to Thomas's thanks, the first guests began to fill the room. Men and women in sophisticated attire, circulating with controlled smiles, looked like part of a cold and calculated choreography. Thomas quickly assumed the role of impeccable host, greeting guests with elegance and authority. Sophia watched him from a distance, noticing how he changed when he entered CEO mode. It was impressive how he could completely transform, donning a mask of confidence that made everyone around admire or perhaps fear him. He maintained absolute control of the situation, and no one dared question him. She was preparing to leave discreetly when she felt a firm hand on her arm. Turning, she found Thomas's intense gaze, as though he were determined to stop her from leaving. "Leaving already?" he asked in a low, almost intimate tone, carrying a hint of disappointment. "I thought you'd stay at least to see the guests' reactions." "My presence isn't necessary here," she replied, trying to keep her tone professional. "My work is done, and now it's your turn." He stepped closer, narrowing the space between them, and Sophia felt her heart race. There was something hesitant in his eyes, almost reluctant, as if he himself questioned the need to have her there. "Staying as my guest wouldn't be so unthinkable, would it?" He gave her a slight, challenging smile, as if testing how far she'd go to keep her distance. Sophia took a deep breath. His challenge was clear, and she knew that accepting the invitation would mean crossing a line she had drawn between them. Being there, beside him, and being seen as more than the florist was tempting but dangerous. She declined gracefully. "I'd prefer you call me when you need more flowers," she replied, with an ironic smile. Thomas chuckled, surprised by her response. Sophia began to walk away, but stopped when she heard his next comment, almost inaudible. "It's not just the flowers I appreciate," he murmured, as if talking to himself. She felt her face flush and chose not to reply, turning towards the door. As she left the room, she heard the sounds of laughter and conversation echoing through the transformed space. Sophia realized that, although her work was complete, something deeper was at play, something that left her torn between the desire to know the Thomas he hid from the world and the need to maintain her independence and emotional safety. As she descended the stairs, she felt a mix of pride and vulnerability. Thomas Lancaster was someone who could shake her world, and she didn't know how prepared she was for that. However, as soon as she set foot outside the house, she realized that, inevitably, he had already begun to affect her. After the event, Sophia tried to resume her routine at the flower shop, throwing herself into work as a way to push thoughts of Thomas Lancaster out of her mind. But no matter how hard she tried, the memory of that intense gaze and the unspoken words continued to haunt her. She felt torn between the attraction and the caution of getting involved with someone like him, whose presence seemed inevitable. For Sophia, dealing with emotions was easier among flowers and plants, where the world was simple, beautiful, and straightforward. Yet with every customer who entered the shop, she felt a slight thrill, half expecting, half dreading that it might be Thomas returning. However, days passed without any sign of him, and gradually, she convinced herself that his interest had been fleeting, a passing curiosity that had already lost its charm. Until, on a Wednesday afternoon, while arranging Lily on the shelf, a message came through on her phone. Sophia wiped her hands on her apron before picking up the device, and upon seeing Thomas Lancaster's name on the screen, her heart skipped a beat. "Sophia, meet me at Café Noir at 5 p.m. I need to discuss something about the next project. Thomas." She read the message multiple times, trying to understand the reason behind the meeting. Café Noir was an elegant, discreet spot in downtown Manhattan, known for attracting executives and high-level professionals. Being invited to a meeting outside her usual work environment was at the very least unusual. However, what intrigued her most was the brief, detail-free message, which sparked a mix of irritation and curiosity. Sophia finished what she was doing, and after closing the flower shop, headed to the designated location. Upon arriving at Café Noir, she spotted Thomas at a reserved table in a discreet corner. He looked as comfortable and imposing as ever, and as he saw her approaching, he gave her a slight smile. "I'm glad you could make it," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I hope you found the place easily." Sophia sat down, maintaining a neutral expression. "This cafe is in a pretty busy area, Mr. Lancaster. But what's so urgent that couldn't be discussed at the flower shop?" He observed her for a moment, studying her reactions before responding. "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something more specific. I truly appreciated your work at the event and realized your approach is exactly what I need for a larger project I'm planning." Sophia leaned in, trying to hide the curiosity that was beginning to build. "And what kind of project would that be?" Thomas rested his elbows on the table and intertwined his fingers, assuming a more serious posture. "I'm launching a new corporate space, a gathering area for employees, something that promotes well-being and creativity. I want it to be a place where they feel inspired, and I believe your vision can provide the right touch. I need someone who understands the importance of details and can create an environment that positively impacts everyone who enters." Sophia was taken aback. This was more than a simple flower arrangement project. He was asking her to create an entire environment, something that required not only artistic skill, but also a deep understanding of the emotional impact a space could provide. "I see. It sounds challenging," she replied, considering it. "But I have to ask, why me? There are plenty of designers and decorators in New York who do this type of work." Thomas gave her an enigmatic smile. "Precisely because you're not just another decorator. Your way of seeing the world is unique. I don't want a standardized approach. I want someone who can turn each detail into something meaningful, and you are the right person for that." His words caught her by surprise. It was the first time he'd expressed himself so personally about her work, making her feel recognized and at the same time vulnerable. "And what exactly do you expect from this space?" she asked, determined to understand what he truly wanted. Thomas looked at her with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. "I want it to have life, Sophia. A place where people feel comfortable but also inspired. Something that breaks the coldness of the corporate environment and offers a human touch. Exactly what you bring to each arrangement." Sophia nodded, sensing the responsibility he was entrusting to her. "This won't be easy, Mr. Lancaster," she replied, trying to keep her tone professional. "I'll need creative freedom and early access to the space. I'll also need to know more about the employees and what they expect from the environment." Thomas nodded, keeping his gaze fixed on her. "You'll have everything you need. I want this project to bear your mark." Those words stirred something within her. Your mark. In a way, he was allowing her to leave a part of herself in that place, and this unexpected trust made her feel special. However, before she could think of a response, the waiter arrived to take their orders. Still surprised, Sophia ordered a coffee, while Thomas ordered his usual espresso, without taking his eyes off her. As the waiter walked away, he relaxed a bit, as if the formality of ordering had given way to a more relaxed conversation. "How long have you had the flower shop?" he asked, breaking the silence with unexpected curiosity. Sophia hesitated, surprised by the change of subject, but decided to answer, 4 years. It was always a dream, and I managed to make it a reality after a lot of effort. And how does a florist remain so determined in a city where everything is about money and power? He asked, his voice full of interest. She looked at him with a mixture of challenge and sincerity. Maybe because I see things differently. For me, flowers represent more than just objects. They have a meaning, a message, a beauty that can't be measured by money. I chose this path because I wanted to do something that truly made an impact on people's lives. Something that brought a bit of peace amidst the chaos. Thomas seemed to reflect on her words, and for a moment, Sophia felt that he was beginning to understand her essence. But soon, he looked away, as if avoiding going deeper into the subject. I see, he said in a softer tone, and that's exactly the vision I want for the project. Something that makes people feel at home, breaking down corporate barriers. A space where inspiration can arise naturally. Sophia watched him, trying to understand his motivations. It was hard to believe that such a rational, results-oriented man was genuinely committed to the idea of bringing a touch of humanity to his company. But at the same time, Thomas's expression seemed sincere, as if he were determined to do something different. At the end of the conversation, Thomas extended his hand to her. "So, are you in?" he asked in a more relaxed tone, though it still carried genuine seriousness. Sophia looked at him for a moment before shaking his hand, feeling the firmness of his grip and the sensation of a new beginning. "I'm in," she replied, smiling. As the meeting concluded, Sophia stood, preparing to say goodbye, but before she could leave, Thomas called her back. "Sophia," he said in a softer, almost hesitant voice, "I hope you know this project is important to me, more than it seems." She looked at him, surprised, trying to decipher what he truly meant with those words. For an instant, Thomas's eyes seemed to reveal an unexpected vulnerability, something he always hid behind his authoritative demeanor. And seeing that expression, Sophia felt that perhaps he was entrusting her, not only with the project, but with something far deeper. "I'll do my best, Mr. Lancaster," she replied firmly. Thomas nodded, satisfied, and watched her leave the cafe with a slight smile, as if he knew this partnership would change their lives more than either could imagine. As she walked back to the flower shop, Sophia felt both determined and intrigued. She knew she was about to embark on a challenging and risky phase, where the line between professionalism and emotion could be difficult to maintain. And as much as she wanted to deny it, Thomas's presence affected her deeply. The following morning, Sophia arrived at Lancaster Enterprises' new building, where she would create the employee lounge commissioned by Thomas. The building, located in one of New York's most prestigious areas, was a feat of modern architecture, with glass windows reflecting the gray sky and impeccably polished marble walls. The facade was impressive but cold, and Sophia knew her challenge would be to add a human touch to it all. Upon entering the lobby, she was greeted by an assistant who guided her to the designated project space. The area was vast, with high ceilings and large windows that flooded the space with natural light. Yet, there was something stifling about the emptiness. It felt more like an extension of the corporate environment than a place of rest and inspiration. Thomas arrived shortly after, his usual confident demeanor softened by a faint smile. "Good morning, Sophia." He greeted her in a gentler tone than usual. "I hope this space meets your expectations." She looked around, carefully analyzing the environment. "The space is great, but it's too impersonal," she replied without hesitation. "We need textures, colors, and elements that convey comfort. Without those, it'll just be another elegant lobby." Thomas nodded, surprised by the determination with which she approached the project. "And what do you suggest?" he asked, crossing his arms, curious to hear her ideas. Sophia took a step forward, gesturing to the areas around her. "I want to create an indoor garden of sorts, with plants of varying tones and heights to bring movement to the space. We could use furniture in natural tones, like wood and soft fabrics, evoking the outdoors," she explained, watching his reaction. "I also thought of installing a living wall, something to bring in a bit of color and life. The goal is for people to feel like they're in a space where they can relax and breathe." Thomas listened carefully, his face showing restrained admiration. "I admit, I never envisioned something like this, but it sounds promising," he said after a brief pause. "You know, It's rare to see someone speak with such passion about something many would consider mere detail. She smiled, slightly shy but pleased. For me, it's these details that make the difference. I believe each space has its own soul, and my role is to bring that out. She looked at him firmly. But to do that, I'll need creative freedom and patience. I don't want to just set up decorations. I want to create an experience. Thomas observed her for a moment, and Sophia noticed a spark of interest in his eyes, as if he were seeing her from a new perspective. Freedom and patience, he repeated, almost reflectively. Those are two things I don't often grant easily, but in your case, I'll make an exception. She smiled, accepting the challenge he seemed to impose. Then we have a deal. The following days were intense. Sophia dedicated herself entirely to the project, transforming the cold and impersonal space into a welcoming, vibrant environment. She started with the living wall, which required meticulous planning and care to ensure the plants thrived indoors. She also brought in comfortable sofas and low tables, creating a contrast between the formality of the environment and the natural warmth she aimed to provide. Thomas made a point of joining her at every step, sometimes arriving even before she did. He would watch in silence as Sophia worked, occasionally offering subtle suggestions, trying to understand more about her creative process. The constant proximity between them created a silent tension, something neither commented on but both felt. One afternoon, as Sophia arranged a few potted plants in a corner, Thomas approached and handed her a cup of coffee, surprising her. "I thought you might need this," he said, with a slight smile, a gesture that felt almost intimate. She accepted the cup, a bit flustered. "Thank you, Mr. Lancaster. I didn't know you were the kind of person who brings coffee for someone." He laughed, and for the first time, Sophia heard a more relaxed tone in his laugh. "I didn't know either, but I think you're bringing out a few exceptions in me." Sophia blushed, unsure how to respond. Deep down, she knew that this closeness was risky. She felt drawn to him in a way that scared her, and yet, the magnetism between them made her question her own boundaries. She knew Thomas was complex, and allowing herself to get involved with him could open doors she wasn't sure she'd know how to close. "Seriously, Sophia," he resumed, his tone more earnest. "You've shown me something I hadn't seen in a long time. A new perspective, a way of looking beyond the surface." She looked into his eyes, sensing the sincerity behind his words. "And what exactly do you see?" Thomas seemed to hesitate for a second, searching for the right words. "A beauty that goes beyond the obvious, a strength that doesn't rely on control but on surrender." He took a step closer, his expression revealing an intensity that left her speechless. "It's inspiring, to be honest." Sophia's heart raced. Those words, spoken with such honesty, disarmed the defenses she tried to keep. But before she could respond, Thomas looked away, as if fearing he had revealed more than he intended. "I think I'm learning from you," he said in a lighter tone. "And maybe that's a good start for something bigger. Who knows?" She smiled shyly, trying to conceal the mixture of emotions he evoked. "I'm glad I can bring a bit of that perspective into your world. Maybe you really do need a different outlook once in a while." He nodded, as if absorbing her words. "Yes, maybe I do." As they finished the final touches on the space, Thomas began asking more personal questions, trying to understand her beyond the professional role she played. He asked about her past, about what inspired her to work with flowers, and each of her answers seemed to spark genuine admiration in him. He wasn't just listening. He showed real interest, as if he wanted to understand what made Sophia such a unique person. And amid the conversations, the glances between them grew more intense, as if a silent understanding was forming between them. However, both knew this was dangerous. There was a thin line between professional interest and personal attraction, a line they both hesitated to cross. Finally, when the space was complete, Thomas made sure to invite the employees for a small inauguration. The transformed environment surprised everyone, with people commenting on its beauty and warmth. Sophia stood to the side, watching the satisfied expressions around her, feeling she had accomplished her goal. By late afternoon, as the employees had dispersed, Thomas approached her again, his eyes shining with a satisfaction he rarely displayed. "You did it, Sophia," he said in a low, sincere voice. "This place isn't just beautiful, it's Inspiring. Exactly what I wanted. Sophia felt warmth fill her chest at his praise. But before she could thank him, Thomas surprised her with an unexpected invitation. To celebrate the success of this project, I thought of something different. I'd like you to have dinner with me tonight. She was caught off guard, the invitation completely surprising her. It was the first time he had extended an invitation beyond the boundaries of work, leaving her feeling unsure. Yet the idea was tempting. She hesitated, trying to organize her thoughts. I'm not sure if it would be appropriate. Thomas, however, simply smiled a smile with a calm determination. Set aside the formalities. Just this once, he requested gently. Just a dinner, Sophia. She sighed, reluctant, but at the same time eager to see where this might lead. All right, Mr. Lancaster, I accept the invitation. As Thomas's satisfied smile revealed a hint of excitement, Sophia felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She knew that accepting the dinner invitation went beyond celebrating the project's success. It was as if, by agreeing, she was opening a door that both had avoided crossing, where professionalism gave way to something unknown. That evening, Thomas arrived at the restaurant before her, seated at a cozy, discreet corner table. When Sophia entered, he stood, and for a brief moment, she felt as if they were in a parallel universe, far from the corporate world and its formalities. Here, Thomas seemed less like a CEO and more human, someone willing to allow himself a moment of spontaneity. You look beautiful, he remarked in a tone that made her blush. Thank you. She smiled, nervous. It's rare to be seen outside the flower shop apron. He chuckled softly, and the conversation began lightly, both speaking about the creation of the space and the employees' reactions. Thomas seemed at ease, without the usual tension and barriers. But as the dinner progressed, the tone of their conversation began to shift. I never asked how you started your life in the flower business, he said during a pause. But something tells me you have a personal reason behind it. Sophia hesitated, looking at him. Realizing his interest was genuine, she decided to share a bit more of herself, something she usually kept private. My mother loved flowers, she began with a nostalgic smile. She always said that every flower had a story and a meaning. When I was young, she taught me everything about flowers, how to care for them, understand what each one conveyed. That's how I fell in love with this world. When she passed away, opening the flower shop was how I kept that connection alive. Thomas listened in silence, and Sophia noticed a rare expression of empathy in his eyes. It was as if, for the first time, he saw beyond the determined, independent woman. She was someone who, like him, knew the pain of losing something precious. I understand that need to keep something alive, he murmured in a softer tone, almost like a confession. Sometimes, work is the only thing that keeps us from facing the emptiness. Thomas's gaze met hers with an intensity that made her shiver. For an instant, he seemed to let his mask fall, showing a piece of his own vulnerability. Sophia felt she was seeing the real Thomas, someone who hid pains and desires as complex as her own. I think, deep down, we're more alike than we imagined, she said with a slight smile. He laughed, looking away, as if surprised by the realization himself. Perhaps you're right. He raised his wine glass in a silent toast. Then, to this unexpected similarity, they toasted, and the moment was followed by a brief silence, where both seemed to absorb the significance of the evening. The dinner continued, filled with conversation and glances carrying an intensity neither could explain. As they left the restaurant, Thomas accompanied her to the entrance, where the cool night air seemed to heighten the sense of connection between them. Both knew that something had changed, but neither had the courage to put it into words. Thank you for accepting the invitation, Sophia, he said in a soft voice. Tonight was special. She nodded, feeling that something precious and indefinable had been established between them. It truly was, she replied sincerely. But I think it's late. Thomas smiled, nodding, though reluctant to say goodbye. He knew that tonight had left a mark, something that neither their masks nor their defenses could erase. And as Sophia walked away, he stood there, watching her until she disappeared into the night, feeling that, for the first time in a long time, his heart was truly vulnerable. In the days following the dinner, Sophia returned to her routine at the flower shop, trying to focus on every detail of her work. But thoughts of Thomas surfaced often, occupying an unexpected space in her life. She recalled his intense gaze, the personal words they'd exchanged, and especially the feeling that he was trying to show her something deeper, something he rarely allowed others to see. Despite her efforts to keep things strictly professional, Sophia couldn't ignore that the dinner had shifted something between them. She felt closer to Thomas, as if they shared a silent understanding. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew, yet it was also irresistible. Meanwhile, Thomas was in his office, reviewing reports and scheduling meetings, but his thoughts kept drifting to Sophia. He had never imagined that someone outside his inner circle could affect him so profoundly. At first, it was mere curiosity, but now he felt something he would never admit. A need to be near her, to hear her ideas and feel the warmth she brought to everything she touched. The control he had always valued was slowly slipping away. That morning, Thomas decided to do something he would have considered impulsive. He picked up the phone and called Bloom and Bliss directly, something he never did, usually relying on an assistant to handle his calls. Bloom and Bliss, good morning. Sophia's cheerful voice answered on the other end. Good morning, Sophia. It's me, Thomas. There was a brief silence on the line as Sophia registered his voice, surprised. Thomas, I wasn't expecting to hear from you so early. Is there something you need? He hesitated, then spoke in a calm, straightforward manner. Actually, yes. I'd like your opinion on a project, something personal. Could you meet me for coffee this afternoon? Sophia didn't answer immediately. There was something in his tone, a mix of seriousness and vulnerability, that intrigued her. She knew that if she accepted, she'd be venturing into a more personal territory with him, something she had been trying to avoid. But curiosity won. Of course, what time? At 4, at the same cafe where we met last time, he replied, a hint of relief in his voice. After hanging up, Sophia felt a mix of anticipation and anxiety. She tried to concentrate on her work until the time of their meeting, but images of Thomas kept resurfacing, making every minute feel like an eternity. When she arrived at the cafe, she found Thomas waiting in a secluded corner. He watched her approach, and something in his gaze made her feel that this conversation would be different from the others. Thank you for coming, Sophia, he said, giving her a faint smile that left her slightly unsettled. Of course. So what's the project? She asked, trying to maintain a professional demeanor. Thomas looked at her for a moment, before responding, as if choosing his words carefully. It's not a project for the company. It's personal, he began, his tone softer. I've been thinking about my home. I want it to feel less cold. Since you worked on Lancaster Enterprises, I've realized that maybe I need a more human touch in my own space too. Sophia was taken aback by his admission. It was rare to see Thomas speak about his own needs so openly. The request felt less like a professional proposition and more like a plea for help, as if he truly wanted his house to feel like a home. That sounds like an important decision, she said carefully. And of course, I'd be honored to help. But why now? What made you change your mind? Thomas lowered his gaze, as if searching for answers in his own silence. I suppose, over the past few months, I felt like something is missing. Sometimes, it feels as if my life is a beautifully decorated display window, but with nothing of real value inside. Since I met you, I've realized that maybe it's time to build something that feels truly mine. Something with soul. His words took her by surprise, and Sophia felt a warmth spread through her chest. Seeing Thomas open up like that made her see him in a new light, filling her with growing empathy. I'm honored that you thought of me for this, she replied sincerely. I'd love to help make your home a place that truly reflects who you are. He nodded, and for a moment, his gaze held hers, as if something profound was blossoming between them, a silent connection that neither could deny. And where do we start? He asked in a lighter tone, as if trying to dispel the intensity of the moment. I think we could use flowers and plants to bring more life to the space, she suggested, slipping back into a professional mode, but still feeling the emotional weight of their conversation. And perhaps add a few elements that remind you of good memories, things that make you feel at home. Thomas smiled, seeming to appreciate the idea. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm looking forward to seeing what you'll create. At the end of their conversation, Thomas thanked her but hesitated as he said goodbye. as if there was something else he wanted to express. Sophia noticed his hesitation but chose not to comment, preferring to maintain the professional distance she was still trying to preserve. That night, as she returned home, Sophia felt restless. Thomas's request had touched her deeply, and she knew that working on his home wouldn't be just another project. She'd be entering his life in a way she had never anticipated, and that brought a mixture of excitement and apprehension. As she prepared her things for the next day, she began listing ideas for Thomas's decor, but her mind kept drifting back to the man behind the proposal. It wasn't just a cold house she'd be transforming. It was a person who, little by little, was allowing himself to feel something more. In the days that followed, Sophia began visiting Thomas's home to plan the new decor. She spent mornings and afternoons selecting colors, textures, and most importantly, plants and flowers that would bring a welcoming atmosphere to the space. She wanted to make every corner feel like a place where Thomas could connect with himself, something more than just a facade. Thomas closely followed her progress, and with each detail she showed him, he became more invested. He began to see his home take on a new life, as if he could finally breathe freely within his own walls. And this change was a direct reflection of Sophia's presence. One afternoon, while they were discussing the choice of a plant for the living room, Thomas paused and watched her in silence. Sophia, absorbed in her work, didn't notice his gaze until he murmured, "You've brought something into my life that I didn't know I needed." She looked up, surprised by his admission. "Thomas, I'm just doing my job." He smiled, shaking his head. "Perhaps that's what you think, but you're doing so much more. Since you came into my life, I've started seeing things differently. My company, my house, even myself." Sophia felt her heart race. She had never imagined that her work could have such a profound impact. Thomas Lancaster, the man who so valued control and order, was standing there, opening up in a way that was both genuine and vulnerable. She wanted to say something, but she found herself at a loss for words, unable to fully grasp the intensity of the moment. "Thank you, Thomas. I don't know what to say," she murmured, her eyes shining with a mix of surprise and emotion. "You don't need to say anything, Sophia," he replied softly. "I just wanted you to know how much this means to me." A silence laden with meaning settled between them, and for a moment, it felt as though everything around them faded away. They were there, amid glances and unspoken words, both aware that something far stronger was growing between them, something neither seemed willing to stop. When the moment passed, Thomas looked away and resumed a professional tone, but Sophia knew that something had irrevocably changed between them. The barrier they had both tried to keep was beginning to crumble, and while they didn't know what the future held, they both felt that this was only the beginning of something far greater. That morning, Sophia arrived at Thomas's house with her heart racing. Every visit to his space, with the decor project underway, brought her closer to an emotionally dangerous territory. But she tried to keep her focus, reminding herself that this was a job and important task that she needed to complete with professionalism. The problem was that, with every exchanged glance, the line between professional and personal seemed to blur a little more. When she entered, Thomas was already waiting in the grand hall, observing the furniture and plants she had brought in over the past few days. There was something in his gaze that went beyond mere appreciation. It looked like a kind of quiet contentment, as if he could finally feel at home. "Good morning, Sophia," he said in a gentle tone, but with a firmness that showed he was attentive to every detail. "Good morning, Mr. Lancaster," she replied, maintaining formality. He laughed, shaking his head. "I think we can leave Mr. Lancaster aside now, don't you?" he asked with a smile. "You can call me Thomas, at least while we're here." She smiled, feeling strangely comfortable with the suggestion. It was true that his home, especially after the changes, felt welcoming, almost as if it were a space they shared. But there was also a weight in the air, a lingering tension that made her heart race whenever she got close to him. Today, Sophia planned to add the final touches to the space. She had brought a selection of white orchids and lily, chosen for their elegance and simplicity, something that matched Thomas's understated style perfectly. He watched her as she arranged the flowers in vases, absorbing every movement with a silent curiosity. "You make it look easy," he commented as she set the flowers in the center of a table. "I suppose when you do something with passion, the difficulty disappears," she replied, focused on her work. "Besides, I'm used to it. I learned to work with flowers as a child." Thomas was quiet for a moment, and when Sophia looked up, she noticed he was watching her with an almost unsettling intensity. "There's so much about you I still want to understand, Sophia," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. She looked away, trying to ignore the effect his words had on her. "I'm just a florist, Thomas. There's not much to understand," she replied, her tone soft but defensive. He took a step closer, and the air around them grew almost palpable. "Don't say that," he murmured, his eyes fixed on hers. "You're much more than that. Since I met you, I feel there's something in you that goes beyond what people usually see. Something that brings life to everything you touch." Sophia felt her face flush, and her heart seemed to beat harder. It was becoming difficult to maintain the emotional distance she tried so hard to keep. Every word of his seemed to touch a part of her soul, something no one had ever reached before. "Thomas," she began, her tone wavering. "I don't know what to say." He looked at her for a moment that felt eternal, then smiled in a way that made her feel even more vulnerable. "You don't need to say anything. Sometimes silence says much more than words," he replied, keeping his intense gaze. The atmosphere in the room was almost suffocating, and before they could get lost in the moment, Sophia looked away and resumed arranging the flowers. She needed a distraction, something to break the tension between them. Thomas noted her attempt to escape the moment, but chose to respect her space. There was a boundary that both seemed reluctant to cross, even though they were inevitably being drawn closer to each other. That afternoon, after they'd finished the last details of the decor, Thomas insisted they have coffee together in the garden. Sophia, still cautious, accepted the invitation, trying to maintain a casual posture. They sat at an elegant marble table in the garden, surrounded by the flowers she had so carefully selected. "I think this is the most pleasant spot in the house now," Thomas commented, looking around. "You've transformed everything in a way I never imagined." "I'm glad you liked it," she replied with a shy smile. "I think we all need a bit of nature around us, something to remind us of simplicity." Thomas observed her in silence for a moment, and Sophia sensed he wanted to say something more. There was depth in his gaze, an intensity that intrigued her. "You know, you've changed many things in my life since you arrived," he said at last. "And I'm not just talking about the decor." She remained silent, her heart pounding as she tried to understand what he was trying to say. Thomas seemed genuinely affected by her presence, which left her torn between curiosity and fear of getting involved. "I was only doing my job, Thomas," she replied in a near defensive tone, though she couldn't hide the hint of emotion in her voice. He laughed softly, as if he couldn't believe she really thought that. "And do you really think that what I feel for you is purely professional?" he asked, his voice low and full of emotion. The question took her by surprise, and Sophia felt her heart race. She didn't know how to respond. Her own feelings were confused, and she didn't want to admit that maybe, just like him, she was also invested. "I don't know what to say," she murmured finally. "This is complicated." He nodded, his gaze softening but still intense. "I know it's complicated, but I want you to know that since the first moment you challenged me at the flower shop, I felt something I'd never felt before. You've made me see the world differently, Sophia, and no matter how much I try to resist it, it seems that each day I feel more connected to you." His words resonated deeply, and Sophia felt she was standing on the edge of a decision that could change everything. Thomas was being honest, opening up in a way few would, and she knew that, if she wanted to, she could let him into her life. But she also knew that by doing so, she would be risking emotions she had always avoided. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her heart. "Thomas, I need time to understand all this," she said sincerely. "You're a very intense person, and I'm trying to find my own balance." He nodded, as if he understood. "I don't want to pressure you, Sophia. I just want you to know that I'm here, willing to wait for you to take your time." Sophia smiled, feeling grateful for his understanding. Despite the tension that still hung between them, there was a mutual understanding, a sense of acceptance that made her feel safe. After a long silence, Thomas suggested they return to the living room. and she followed him, still reflecting on everything he had said. It was hard to believe that someone like Thomas Lancaster, a man so focused on results and power, was here, patiently waiting for something she might never be ready to give. At the end of the day, when Sophia was about to leave, Thomas called out to her once more. "Sophia, thank you for everything. This project, the time you've spent here, it's meant a lot to me," he said, his tone softer. "I hope we can continue this connection, whatever path it may take." She nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions she still needed to understand. "I hope so too, Thomas." She gave him a final smile before leaving. And as she walked through the streets of New York on her way home, she felt as though a part of her had been left behind in that house, which now felt so different. She knew that their relationship was only beginning, and as much as she tried to deny it, she felt herself being drawn ever closer to him. The days after her last conversation with Thomas passed slowly for Sophia. Every detail he had shared, each word spoken with unusual sincerity for him, echoed in her mind, unsettling her in a way she couldn't quite define. She felt drawn to him in a way that frightened her, as if she were approaching something that could consume her entire emotional stability. At the flower shop, Sophia tried to lose herself in work, focusing on each order and dedicating herself to the flowers with her usual passion. But no matter how hard she tried, memories of Thomas's gaze and gestures were always there, hovering like a constant breeze. She wondered if she should allow herself to feel something for him, or if it was merely the allure of his complex, unreachable world, a fascination with a man who seemed both powerful and vulnerable. Across town, Thomas wrestled with his own feelings. In his office, he reviewed contracts and attended important meetings, but he felt that something was out of place. He couldn't fully focus on anything, as every time he closed his eyes or glanced out the window, an image of Sophia would emerge, drawing him to a place he was unaccustomed to visiting, his own vulnerability. After much reflection, Thomas decided he needed to see Sophia again. He wasn't entirely sure what he wanted to say or how he would act, but he knew he couldn't let time slip by without trying to understand what this connection truly meant for both of them. One overcast morning, he stepped into Bloom and Bliss. The bell above the door chimed, and Sophia, who was arranging some flowers at the counter, looked up. Seeing Thomas standing in the doorway, her heart skipped a beat. His expression was calm, but his eyes held a restless energy that made her nervous. "Thomas?" she said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here so early." He approached her slowly, his eyes fixed on her. "I know, but I needed to see you, Sophia. I needed to understand if what I feel for you is real, or just an impossible idea." She was silent, unsure of what to say. His tone carried an intensity that made it impossible to look away. "Thomas, I think you're confusing things," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm even though her heart raced. "Our relationship has always been professional. Everything that happened was a result of this work." He gave a half smile, as if he didn't believe her words. "I know it's more than that, Sophia," he murmured, his voice soft yet firm. "I feel different when I'm with you. I feel like, for the first time in a long time, I'm seeing the world beyond contracts and responsibilities. This can't just be professional." Sophia looked away, trying to collect her thoughts. She knew there was something special between them, but she also knew how complicated a relationship with him could be. Thomas was someone accustomed to control, while she was independent and cherished her own space. "Thomas, I'm not sure I'm ready for something like this," she finally said. "I don't know if I want to give up what I've worked so hard to build." He was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. "I'm not asking you to give up anything, Sophia," he replied, his voice quieter. "I just want to know if you feel the same, if you're at least willing to try." The question took her by surprise. Thomas was being direct and honest, showing a kind of vulnerability she knew he rarely revealed. Sophia found herself torn between the fear of getting hurt and the desire to experience what they could have together. She knew that once involved with someone like him, it would be difficult to turn back. She began, uncertain how to finish. "Thomas, maybe we need time to understand if this is real, or just attraction to something new, something different." Thomas nodded, seeming to understand. It was clear he had hoped for a more immediate answer, but he was willing to give her the space she needed. "You're right. Maybe time is what we need," he said, taking a step back. "But know that I'll be here, waiting, whenever you're ready." Sophia watched as he left the flower shop, her heart feeling heavy. She knew this was the kind of decision that could change her life, but she also knew she wasn't ready to fully give herself to someone who, despite his interest, remained something of a mystery to her. After Thomas left, she tried to return to work, but nothing seemed to take him out of her mind. She felt torn between two worlds, one that represented the stability she had fought for, and another filled with promises and uncertainties. Sophia spent the entire day questioning herself, trying to find an answer to what she truly felt. Meanwhile, Thomas returned to his office, but the feeling of emptiness lingered. He knew he had opened a door to something he couldn't control, and it left him vulnerable, a state he avoided at all costs. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't shake the thought that Sophia was special. Someone who made him want to change and allow himself to be a different version of himself. In the days that followed, both tried to resume their routines, but the distance only intensified the attraction and curiosity. Sophia knew something powerful connected them, and despite her decision to wait, she felt closer each day to the moment she would have to choose. Thomas, though still focused on his work, found himself more distracted than ever, unable to stop thinking about her. Finally, after nearly a week of silence, Thomas couldn't bear Sophia's absence any longer. He called her, and his voice over the phone was filled with a sincerity that took her by surprise. "Sophia, I tried to follow your request and give space, but I need to see you. We need to talk." She hesitated, but knew he was right. What they felt for each other wasn't something that could be ignored forever. "All right, Thomas, we can meet. The same cafe?" "Yes," he replied, a note of relief in his voice. When they met at the cafe, the atmosphere was more charged than ever. The two sat in silence for a few moments until, in an impulsive gesture, Thomas took Sophia's hand, his eyes shining with an intensity she had never seen. "Sophia, I don't want to force you into anything, but I need to be honest. I'm in love with you, and as much as I know we're from different worlds, I can't stop thinking about what we could be together." Thomas's words, spoken with rare intensity and vulnerability, left Sophia speechless. She felt a warmth spreading through her, realizing that maybe she was approaching the moment where she would have to choose between the safety she had always sought and the possibility of experiencing something profound, something that both scared and attracted her. "Thomas," she murmured, feeling emotion well up in her voice, "I feel something for you too, but I'm afraid of what this could mean, afraid of what I might lose by getting involved with you." He nodded, gently squeezing her hand in a gesture of understanding and patience. "I know it's hard, and I understand your fears, but if you're willing to try, I promise I'll do everything I can to make it worth it." Sophia took a deep breath, feeling an unexpected courage rise within her. Maybe it was time to let herself live something different, something that would bring a new color to her life. "Then, let's try," she finally said, her eyes shining with a mixture of fear and hope. Thomas smiled, and in that moment, Sophia knew she was about to step into a new chapter of her life, a chapter filled with uncertainties, but also with the promise of a love she had never experienced before. The first days after deciding to try a relationship were strange for both of them. Sophia still questioned her choice, torn between the excitement Thomas stirred in her and the obvious still questioned her choice. Insecurity of opening her heart to someone from a world so different from her own. Thomas, on the other hand, was determined to make it work, but felt lost trying to express his feelings. He had never been good at handling emotions, and with Sophia, everything felt more challenging and at the same time, more real. That first week, Thomas surprised Sophia by showing up at Bloom and Bliss on a busy Friday afternoon. The flower shop was bustling, and Sophia, busy with an order, looked up to see Thomas entering with no hesitation. Her heart skipped a beat, both from surprise and from seeing him in such a simple, unassuming space, a contrast to the luxury and power of his daily life. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying not to reveal her nervousness. Her assistants watched curiously, not used to seeing her with someone so imposing. He smiled, a bit awkward, but clearly amused by the situation. "I thought I might see you before the weekend. Besides, I've never seen you in your natural habitat," he teased. glancing around as if trying to absorb the atmosphere. She laughed, relaxing a little at his attempt to fit in. "I guess my habitat is a lot more relaxed than yours," she replied, arranging some flowers in a vase. "I'm used to the activity here, but it's very different from your elegant office." Thomas watched her with genuine interest, as if trying to unravel every detail about her. "Maybe that's exactly what draws me to you. You show me a side of life I've never had," he murmured softly, in a tone only she could hear. Sophia felt her heart tighten. She knew he was being honest, but she also understood there was still so much he didn't know about her world. She wanted him to see everything realistically, without illusions or temporary enchantments. "And do you really think you'll get used to something so different?" she asked, her tone a bit more serious. Thomas looked at her deeply, his expression revealing a sincere determination. "I want to at least try. I know it's different from everything I know, but since I met you, I can't imagine my life without this." Sophia smiled, trying to contain the emotions he stirred in her. In that moment, she felt that maybe it was possible, that maybe they could find a middle ground between their two worlds. After work, Thomas waited for her to close up the shop. They walked through the streets of New York together, talking about everything and nothing, feeling a lightness and naturalness that few relationships achieve. He listened as she told stories about her clients and the unique ways people connected with flowers. Thomas was fascinated. He had never imagined something so simple could carry so much meaning. "I want to take you somewhere," he said suddenly, his eyes sparkling. Sophia looked at him, intrigued, and nodded. They walked to an elegant, discreet restaurant in the heart of the city. She hesitated, as it wasn't the type of place she usually went to, but the way he looked at her, with such warmth and expectation, convinced her to accept the invitation. They sat at a reserved table, and Thomas ordered their meal. While waiting, he held her hand across the table, and the connection between them was undeniable. Sophia felt safe yet out of her comfort zone. It was clear he was doing everything he could to integrate her into his world, but she feared losing herself in the process. The evening passed in light conversations, laughter, and exchanged glances that revealed just how deeply they were involved. Thomas opened up about his childhood and how he'd always felt the need to prove his worth in the business world. And Sophia listened attentively, beginning to understand why he was so closed and controlled. When dinner ended, Thomas walked her back to her apartment. Standing outside her door, he looked at her deeply, as if trying to read her emotions. "Sophia, I know our relationship won't be easy. We're from different worlds, with opposite routines, and our values. Sometimes they seem far apart," he said, holding her hands firmly. "But I want you to know that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to find a balance. I don't want you to change who you are for me." She nodded, touched by his sincerity. "I want that too, Thomas. But I need to know you'll accept me with all my fears, all my uncertainties. I'm not perfect, and I won't adapt to your world as easily as you're trying to adapt to mine." He brushed a hand over her cheek, his expression full of acceptance. "You're exactly who I want, Sophia. With all your fears and doubts, I don't expect perfection. I just want you to be true." The moment between them was so intense that Sophia felt as though there were no more barriers, as if they were both allowing themselves to be entirely vulnerable. Then she smiled and leaned in, her lips meeting his in a tender, deep kiss, sealing what they were both willing to build together. The days that followed were a blend of magic and adaptation. They tried to adjust their routines to spend more time together, but challenges soon began to arise. Thomas, with his packed schedule and frequent meetings, sometimes had to cancel plans at the last minute. Although Sophia understood, she felt a pang of frustration seeing their time together interrupted by work. She knew Thomas's success depended on his dedication and control, but she began to realize how much his world demanded sacrifices she wasn't used to making. Meanwhile, Thomas also faced difficulties. Although he was enchanted by the simplicity of Sophia's life, he felt uncertain about how to integrate her into his social circles and the expectations others had of him. One night, Thomas took Sophia to a business gala. He wanted her to see his world, but he knew it would be a test for them both. Sophia looked stunning but felt nervous. The formal environment was far from comfortable for her, and she felt out of place among the executives and business people who seemed to assess her silently. Throughout the event, she noticed some people casting critical glances her way, and although Thomas tried to keep her close, his obligations occasionally pulled him away. At one point, Sophia found herself alone, feeling like she was trying to fit into something that would never truly belong to her. When Thomas returned to her side, he noticed her discomfort. "Sophia, is everything okay?" he asked, concerned. She hesitated but decided to be honest. "Thomas, I understand that this is your world, but I don't know if I can feel a part of it. I feel out of place." Thomas took her hand, trying to reassure her. "I know it's hard, Sophia, and I feel guilty for putting you through this. I don't want you to feel obligated to fit into this environment," he said sincerely. Sophia sighed, trying to keep her composure. "I want to be with you, Thomas, but I need to feel that I can still be myself. I don't want to lose my essence trying to fit into a world that isn't mine." He nodded, understanding her dilemma, his face reflecting the pain of realizing that he might never be able to offer her the simplicity she valued so much. "I don't want you to lose your essence. That's what I love about you," he murmured, pulling her close. "And if you need more time to adjust, I'll be here by your side, without forcing you." Sophia smiled, relieved to see he was willing to understand her limitations. That night, as they left the event and walked together through the streets of New York, they both felt that their relationship would be a constant challenge, a delicate balance between two opposing worlds. But as difficult as it might be, they were both committed to fighting for what they were building together. Thomas and Sophia had been together for only a few weeks, but every encounter felt charged with intense emotions, as if everything between them was a battle between love and doubt. Despite her efforts to adapt, Sophia increasingly felt out of place in his world. The formal parties and meetings, the constant work interruptions, and the pressure of social expectations that Thomas faced weighed on her, slowly eroding the lightness and romance they'd shared in the beginning. One evening, Sophia waited anxiously for Thomas at her apartment. He had promised they would spend the night together, but it was already past 10, and there was no sign of him. For the 5th time that hour, she picked up her phone and reread his last message. Sent earlier, "I have something important to take care of at the office, but I'll be there soon. Wait for me." She sighed, a mix of frustration and worry. This scene had become more frequent, and although she tried to understand the demands of his job, she couldn't shake the feeling of being abandoned. Finally, close to midnight, Thomas arrived. He looked visibly tired, but a weary smile formed on his lips when he saw Sophia's face. "I'm sorry I'm late. It was a hellish day at the office," he said, leaning in to kiss her. But Sophia turned her face, avoiding his kiss. The hurt she'd been holding back erupted, and before she could stop herself, the words spilled out. "Thomas, I don't know how much longer I can handle this. You promised tonight would be different, and once again, I was left waiting alone." He looked at her, surprised by her tone. Thomas was used to people in his life accepting his justifications without question, but the pain in Sophia's eyes left him speechless. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be like this, but there are things I can't avoid," he said, trying to explain, but she wasn't convinced. "Maybe that's the problem, Thomas. You live for your work, and I feel like a secondary part of your life, only here when you have spare time. I don't know if I can take this anymore." He took a deep breath, struggling to control the frustration and feeling of losing his grip on something important. "I never wanted you to feel that way, Sophia, and you're not a secondary part of my life. I love you, and that's stronger than anything I've ever felt." His words left her speechless. Thomas had never said "I love you" before, and hearing it, even in the heat of an argument, made her heart falter. She felt tears welling up, but there was still a heaviness in her chest she couldn't ignore. "Love, Thomas, isn't just words. It's commitment. It's being present, and I don't know if you can give me that." The pain in Sophia's words hit Thomas in a way he'd never expected. He felt helpless, as if the responsibilities and pressures of his life were pulling him away from the one person he truly wanted by his side. He tried to approach her, gently holding her hands. "Sophia, I need you with me. Only you make me see the world differently. I'm trying to adapt, to find balance, but this is new to me. Give me a chance." She looked at him, still torn. Her love for Thomas was real, but the fear of getting hurt was equally strong. She sighed, closing her eyes as if searching for an answer within herself. "I'll try, Thomas, but you need to understand that I'm not like the people in your circle. I need something simpler, something steady. I don't know how to live in the shadow of your responsibilities." He nodded, and in that moment, he realized he was more committed than ever. This was the woman who made him feel alive. But she was also someone who could break his heart if he didn't find a way to balance it all. That night, they stayed together in silence, both feeling the weight of the moment, aware that they were treading on fragile ground. In the days that followed, Thomas tried to adjust, but the pressure at work only intensified. An unexpected crisis at the company demanded his full attention, and once again, plans with Sophia were postponed. She tried to be understanding, but the pain of waiting for him, knowing something else was always more important, began to turn into a bitterness she didn't know how to control. One night, after another last-minute cancellation, Sophia decided she needed time to think. She needed air, needed to regain a sense of herself before she let herself be consumed by a love that seemed to demand more than she could give. The next morning, she showed up at his office, determined to find some clarity and perhaps even to say goodbye. When she arrived, Thomas's assistant greeted her with visible discomfort. "I'm sorry, Miss Wilson, but Mr. Lancaster is in a meeting. He said he couldn't be interrupted." Sophia's heart sank. Once again, she wasn't a priority. She waited for hours, and when Thomas finally appeared, she felt the weight of all the moments she had waited, the minutes and hours of frustration she carried. He stopped when he saw her, surprised and a bit anxious. "Sophia, what are you doing here? I was just about to call you." But she interrupted him, unable to hold back her tears. "Thomas, I waited. I waited so many times I lost count. I love you, but I can't keep going like this, always waiting to be part of your life." He reached out to touch her, but she stepped back, unable to bear the pain and weight of broken promises. "Maybe we both need time," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I need to understand what I'm doing, and maybe you do too." Thomas stood silent, feeling the impact of her words. He didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to face the thought of losing her. But before he could say anything, Sophia gave him one last look and left, leaving him alone with the emptiness he feared. In the days that followed, they each tried to distract themselves, but the absence of each other was unbearable. Thomas threw himself into work, trying to fill the void, while Sophia sought solace in her friends and work, attempting to forget the man who had stolen her heart. They each suffered in their own way, but at the same time, they both knew this was a love that couldn't be easily forgotten. It was a love that challenged, that hurt, but that, at its core, made them feel whole. And so, the days turned into weeks. They didn't see each other, didn't speak, but the memory of the moments they shared haunted them. They both knew a choice would have to be made, but the fear of opening their hearts again and getting hurt held them back. Then, one night, Thomas picked up his phone, staring at her picture he still kept. He felt he was on the verge of a decision that would change everything, but he didn't know how to regain Sophia's trust. He knew she still loved him, but he also knew that his world, his responsibilities, might be an insurmountable barrier. It was the kind of choice he'd never imagined he'd have to make between love and everything he had built. And as the minutes passed, he wondered if he had the courage to give up control and fight for what truly mattered. The silence between Thomas and Sophia stretched into days that felt like months. The distance, initially meant to calm things down, began to weigh on them, becoming an unbearable burden. For both, each day was a struggle against longing and against memories that seemed to resurface with every quiet moment. At the flower shop, Sophia tried to distract herself by attending to customers and organizing the flowers, keeping busy. But every romantic bouquet request or couple that entered the store reminded her of the emptiness she felt without Thomas. She knew he had tried to adapt to her life, that there had been sincerity in every gesture and every promise, but the pain of feeling like a secondary part, unable to be his priority, was still an open wound. The nights were even harder for her. When she came home to find herself alone, the sense of absence was almost tangible. She remembered the moments he had told her he loved her, the sparkle in his eyes as he spoke about their future together, and it filled her with a regret and longing that weighed heavily on her. One particularly cold and quiet night, Sophia picked up her phone and stared at his number. Her fingers hovered over the call button, but in a moment of self-protection, she hesitated. She knew that if she gave in to the longing and reached out without certainty, that things would be different. She would only hurt herself again. Meanwhile, across town, Thomas buried himself in an exhausting routine, using work as a desperate attempt to fill the void Sophia had left. But no matter how much he tried to distract himself with meetings and contracts, her image surfaced constantly in his mind, like a shadow he couldn't escape. Late at night, alone in his office, Thomas would sit among scattered papers, entirely unfocused. The sense of loss troubled him in a way he had never experienced before. He was used to controlling everything, being responsible for every detail of his life and company. But when it came to Sophia, he felt utterly powerless. One of those nights, he picked up his phone and opened his photo gallery. There was a picture he had taken secretly of her one day while she was decorating his home. Sophia was distracted, arranging flowers with the care and delicacy he so admired, her serene smile leaving him breathless. It was as if he could feel her presence there, and the pain of knowing he had pushed her away consumed him. He knew that his absences and broken promises had hurt Sophia deeply, and each day he felt guilt gnawing at him. He struggled to understand how someone so accustomed to having everything under control had allowed the love of his life to slip through his fingers. Finally, on a night when longing and regret became unbearable, Thomas realized he couldn't go on this way. He needed Sophia, and he was willing to do whatever it took to win her back and show her that he was ready to change. The next morning, he made an unexpected decision. He cleared his schedule, canceled meetings, and picked up the phone. He called an assistant and made a series of arrangements, outlining a plan with renewed determination. He was ready to go to any lengths to prove to her that she was indeed the priority in his life. Meanwhile, Sophia tried to move on, but her heart resisted the idea of forgetting him. Even knowing that the relationship was challenging and that promises had been broken, she still loved him in a way she couldn't explain. Just thinking about Thomas made her heart race, and each memory made the longing more painful. That afternoon, while attending to a customer in the flower shop, she heard the door chime. When she looked up, her heart stopped. Thomas stood there at the entrance, his expression serious and determined, his eyes fixed on her. The customer bid farewell, leaving them alone. The silence between them was almost tangible, and Sophia felt a mixture of anger and longing, of love and hurt. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" she asked, trying to keep her composure, though her voice wavered. He took a deep breath, as if summoning all his strength to speak. "Sophia, I can't go on without you. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I need a chance to show you that I can change. You are the only person who truly matters in my life." She averted her gaze, feeling tears welling up. She didn't want to give in so easily, but his words hit her in a way she couldn't ignore. "Thomas, I don't know if I can believe that everything will be different. The promises were broken so many times that I don't know if I can trust again." He took a step closer to her, his voice trembling slightly. "I understand, Sophia, and I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I just want the chance to prove that I'm willing to do anything for you. Can I start now? Let me be by your side. Let me regain your trust, one day at a time." She felt the weight of sincerity in his words, and though she was hurt, the love she still felt was undeniable. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but a part of her desperately wanted to believe he would truly change, that their bond was strong enough to overcome the obstacles. "Thomas," she whispered, I need time, but maybe I can try." He nodded, and for the first time in weeks, his expression softened. "Thank you, Sophia. I'll prove to you that it's worth it." In the days that followed, Thomas made an effort to be there. He stopped by the flower shop, bringing her flowers, talking to her between work breaks, and showing a tenderness she had never seen before. He knew he couldn't expect her to trust him again instantly, but he was willing to dedicate every second to making her feel secure. For Sophia, the process of reconciliation was intense. She still carried the scars of the pain he had caused her, but each gesture, each effort he made, led her to believe that he was genuinely committed to being the man she needed. One evening, Thomas invited her for dinner at his home. He had arranged the space with candles and flowers, the same one she had chosen to decorate the space months earlier. Sophia was moved to see that he had cared for every detail, transforming the place into something that reflected not only his taste, but also her presence. "I wanted you to know that, from now on, this place isn't just mine. It's ours," he said, holding her hand. "And every time you look at these flowers, I want you to remember that I'm here, ready to make it work." His words touched her heart in a way she hadn't expected. And as she saw the sincerity in his eyes, she felt that perhaps there was hope. The hurt was still there, but the love she felt for him made her believe they could rebuild what they had lost. Over dinner, Thomas opened up even more, confessing his fears and the challenges he faced in balancing work and personal life. He promised her he would do everything to ensure she never felt secondary again. And for the first time, Sophia felt she could give him a second chance. At the end of the night, as they said goodbye, he hugged her tightly, and both felt that something had changed. It was a new beginning, a sincere attempt to move past the pain and build something strong together. And that night, as she walked home, Sophia realized that as painful as the journey might be, it was still worth fighting for this love. She knew they would face challenges ahead, but she felt that, together, they could face whatever came their way. After that special night, Thomas and Sophia embarked on a phase of rediscovery. Everything felt deeper and more genuine. Yet each moment carried a weight, a sense that any misstep could unravel what they were trying to rebuild. Sophia, though cautious, allowed herself to believe that Thomas was committed to making their relationship work, while Thomas, for the first time, dedicated time and energy to balance his work with their time together. The early days following their reconciliation were filled with tender moments and small gestures that brought a new glow to their relationship. Thomas frequently stopped by the flower shop, surprising Sophia with coffee and little declarations. One morning, he walked in with a carefully chosen bouquet and found her organizing shelves. "For you, Miss Wilson," he said, handing her the bouquet with a smile. "I thought it'd be nice to start the day with something special." Sophia laughed, touched, as she took the flowers. "I never imagined you'd be the one bringing me flowers, you know," she replied, still adjusting to his new approach. He pulled her into a hug, and as he felt her warmth, he realized just how important this relationship was to him. Thomas knew he needed to show, not just promise, that he was dedicated to keeping Sophia by his side. That same night, he took her out for dinner. It was a cozy, unpretentious restaurant, with soft lighting creating an intimate atmosphere. Thomas knew Sophia preferred simple, quiet places, and he was willing to make compromises so she'd feel at ease. During dinner, their glances and touches conveyed more than words. Sophia noticed his effort to adapt to her world, and it made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could overcome their differences. Yet, Sophia's insecurities still lingered. Despite Thomas's gestures, part of her remained hesitant, fearing he might eventually revert to prioritizing work, leaving her behind once again. She knew her love for him was real, but she was afraid his demanding world would eventually suffocate them both. Things were going well until one night, Thomas invited her to a charity event organized by his company. While she understood he was trying to include her in his life, Sophia couldn't shake the discomfort of facing that formal environment again, surrounded by people who viewed her simply as the florist. "Thomas, I'm not sure I'm ready for an event like this," she said while they were at his apartment. "I know you're trying to include me, but I'm afraid I won't fit in." He listened, understanding yet resolute. "I get it, Sophia, but you're the most important person in my life now. I want others to know that. I want us to stand side by side, to show that we're a team," he said, holding her hand firmly. "And if anyone dares judge, that's their problem, not ours." Despite her insecurities, Sophia agreed. Deep down, she wanted to be by Thomas's side and hoped they could face their differences together. Still, the discomfort was hard to ignore, and on the event night, as she entered the ballroom with him, her anxiety was evident. Thomas stayed close, proudly introducing her to colleagues and clients. But gradually, he was drawn into unexpected conversations and meetings. At one point, Sophia found herself alone, surrounded by people casting curious or dismissive glances. Conversations around her focused on business and investments, and she felt increasingly out of place, like a stranger in an unfamiliar world. One of Thomas's colleagues, an elegant and confident woman named Megan, approached and greeted her with a polite smile. "So you're Sophia?" Megan asked, her voice calm but with a curious look. "Thomas mentioned you own a flower shop, right?" Sophia nodded, sensing the subtle condescension in Megan's tone. "Yes, I own Bloom and Bliss," she replied, trying to keep her composure. Megan gave her a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It must be lovely to have such a peaceful hobby, though I imagine the pace at Lancaster Enterprises is a bit more intense than you're used to." Those words hit Sophia like a blow. She tried to stay calm, but she felt increasingly uncomfortable and vulnerable. All she wanted at that moment was to escape the silent judgment and implicit comparisons. Just then, Thomas appeared, noticing the tension in her expression. He quickly approached, placing a gentle hand on her back. "Is everything okay here?" he asked, his tone filled with concern. Sophia looked at him, unable to hide the sense of unease that plagued her. She couldn't keep concealing the feeling of inadequacy that haunted her. "I think I need some air, Thomas," she said quietly. Thomas could sense the depth of her emotions and nodded, concerned. He led her outside, where the cool night air seemed to ease some of the tension. Alone, he looked at her, and Sophia saw the guilt in his eyes. "Sophia, I'm sorry. I didn't realize this would make you so uncomfortable. I just wanted to show that you're part of my life," he said, sincerely. She looked at him, feeling a mixture of love and pain. "Thomas, I love you, but these events make me feel like I don't belong in your world. Sometimes I feel like I'm forcing something that might never work," she confessed, the words slipping out before she could hold them back. He sighed, visibly affected by her words. "Sophia, you're everything I want, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make you feel comfortable, to show you that you're the most important person in my life. I can't change my past or the people I deal with, but I can promise that I'll never stop prioritizing you," he said, holding her face gently. Sophia looked into his eyes, trying to believe his words, but she still felt an invisible barrier between them. She knew Thomas's love was genuine, but she feared the pressures of his world would eventually weigh more heavily than they could handle. "I need you, Sophia. I can't imagine my life without you. I know I'm asking a lot, but can you trust me?" he asked, his vulnerability touching her deeply. She nodded slowly, still with an aching heart, but determined to try. She knew the journey would be challenging, but she was willing to fight for the love she felt for him. "Let's try, Thomas, but promise me that if things get complicated, we won't hide behind excuses. Let's be honest with each other, always," she said firmly. He agreed, embracing her tightly, as if that gesture were his only anchor in a sea of uncertainties. That night, both knew they were risking everything, but the love they shared was strong enough to give them courage. The following days marked a new chapter, full of promises and small sacrifices. Thomas stayed true to his word, working to balance his job and their relationship healthily, while Sophia worked on overcoming her insecurities and learning to trust him more. Yet both knew it was a daily battle, where each had to give their best to overcome barriers and find a middle ground between their two opposing worlds. In the weeks following their reconciliation, Thomas and Sophia grew closer than ever. Each day strengthened their commitment, but new tensions began to surface. Thomas worked hard to keep his promise to make her his priority, and Sophia, in turn, started to feel more secure and confident by his side. However, the harmony between them was soon put to the test. One Friday afternoon, while arranging flowers at Bloom and Bliss, Sophia received an unexpected visitor. A sophisticated woman with perfectly styled hair and a confident smile entered the shop, immediately drawing the attention of the staff and of Sophia. "Hello, I'm Olivia Brandt. I imagine you're Sophia Wilson," the woman said, with an assessing gaze that seemed to take in every detail of Sophia. Sophia felt her stomach twist upon hearing the name. She knew who Olivia Brandt was, Thomas's ex-girlfriend, someone he never spoke of, but whom everyone in his circle knew. Olivia came from a powerful family, well connected in the business elite. Her presence in Sophia's shop was unexpected and unsettling. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" Sophia replied, keeping her tone polite while battling a surge of jealousy and insecurity. Olivia smiled, a polite but subtly sharp smile. "I just wanted to meet the famous Sophia, who Thomas has spoken about so much," she said, her tone casual yet laced with a clear intent. "You know, Thomas and I were very close. It's nice to see he's found something different to keep him occupied." Sophia felt the impact of Olivia's words like a punch. She tried to stay calm, but the comment was so loaded with insinuation that it was impossible to ignore the jealousy and anger building up inside her. "Thomas and I are very happy together, but thank you for your concern," Sophia replied, keeping her gaze steady. Olivia let out a soft laugh, as if amused by Sophia's response. "Well, I'm glad you're feeling secure, dear. I just wanted to make sure you knew. Thomas and I have always had something special. Even after we drifted apart, he's always found his way back to the world he belongs to." With that, Olivia gave a final calculated look and left the shop, leaving Sophia in a storm of emotions. She knew Olivia's intentions were clear: to plant seeds of insecurity in her relationship, and as much as she tried to brush off the comment, doubts and jealousy began to gnaw at her. That evening, when Thomas came by the flower shop, he immediately sensed that something was wrong. Concerned, he took her aside to a quiet corner. "Sophia, what happened?" he asked, holding her hands firmly. She looked into his eyes, unsure of how to bring it up, but decided honesty was the best way forward. "Your ex, Olivia, came by today," she said, voice tight with emotion. "She implied that you two share something special, and that you always end up back in your world." "Why would she say that, Thomas?" Thomas sighed, visibly irritated and troubled. He knew Olivia was ambitious and manipulative, and her visiting Sophia was a bad sign. "Sophia, listen, Olivia and I were together a long time ago. It was a period when I was more focused on forming business alliances than on real emotions. When we broke up, she didn't handle it well. And now that I'm with you," he hesitated, searching for the right words. "It seems like she's trying to test you, to make you doubt." Sophia took a deep breath, trying to control the jealousy and anger bubbling within her. "And you? Are you sure about what you want? Because I'm not going to compete for your attention, Thomas. I won't put myself in that situation." He moved closer, gently holding her face. "Sophia, you are all I want. Olivia is part of my past, and I would never go back to that. My place is with you, and I won't let anyone or anything come between us," he said, his tone resolute. She embraced him, finding comfort in his reassurance, though a hint of insecurity still lingered. She knew Thomas was committed to her, but the constant reminder that he was surrounded by people who didn't accept her made her feel increasingly vulnerable. This feeling only grew days later, when Thomas decided to formally introduce Sophia to his family. He knew his parents had reservations about their relationship, but he was determined to face any opposition for her. At the Lancaster family home, Sophia felt the weight of the formal environment as soon as she entered. Thomas's father, a man with a rigid posture and a severe gaze, greeted her with a cold expression, while his mother, elegant and composed, seemed to assess her with a mixture of indifference and disdain. Throughout dinner, his parents' subtle comments made it clear they did not approve of the relationship. Thomas's mother discreetly mentioned how busy he was and how much he needed someone who understood the demands of his position. At one point, his father, Mr. Lancaster, chose to make his view painfully explicit. "Thomas, I know you're an adult, but you must remember that your work requires an image compatible with the world you represent. I can't deny that I'd hoped you'd choose a partner who understands these demands," he said, casting a cold glance at Sophia. Sophia felt her face flush as Mr. Lancaster's words hit home, reinforcing every fear and insecurity that had been brewing inside her. She knew that to his family, she would always be the florist, someone who didn't belong to their world. She tried to maintain her composure, but the pain in her chest was undeniable. Seeing her discomfort, Thomas stepped in, his tone firm. "Dad, Sophia is the woman I love, and neither my work nor our image matters compared to that. She makes me happy, and that's what's important to me," he said, squeezing Sophia's hand with a look of unwavering support. But his family's opposition remained unshaken. Dinner continued in tense silence, and by the time they left and returned to Sophia's apartment, a heavy silence hung between them. Sophia stopped in the entryway, unable to hold back her tears. "Thomas, I don't know if I can keep doing this. It feels like everyone around you is testing me, trying to prove that I'm not good enough. And as much as I try to be strong, I don't know how much more I can take." He held her tightly, his face showing a deep sadness. "I understand, Sophia, and I'm so sorry. But you need to know that, despite everything, I choose you every day. I'll stand up to my family, face whatever it takes, but only if you're by my side." She looked at him, trying to summon the strength to believe his words, but the insecurities were still a difficult obstacle to overcome. "I love you, Thomas, but the pressure of being with you is becoming unbearable. I don't want to be the choice that makes you lose everything you've built," she said, feeling the weight of each word. He embraced her, both of them silent, as if standing on the edge of a decision that would shape their future. Thomas knew he had to fight to prove his love, but he also knew that the resistance and jealousy surrounding them were formidable barriers. That night, as he left her, both felt that they were risking everything for a love that, though powerful, came with the heavy burdens of expectations and fears that loomed over them. In the days following the tense dinner with Thomas's family, Sophia felt increasingly consumed by doubt and insecurity. Although he showed his love intensely, doing everything he could to make her feel secure, the opposition to their relationship grew heavier each day. It felt as if every gesture of affection from Thomas was followed by a test, a new attempt to prove that their worlds were incompatible. One morning, while working in the flower shop, Sophia received a bouquet of flowers, a rare gesture as she was usually the one arranging them. Along with the bouquet was a small handwritten note, "Greater than Sophia. I wanted you to know that each one of these flowers represents how important you are to me. I'm willing to face everything to prove that what I feel is true. With love, Thomas." As she read his words, Sophia's heart warmed. He was doing everything he could to show he was committed, that his love for her was real. But at the same time, the memory of Olivia and his parents' cold words lingered in her mind as a constant reminder that, to many, their relationship was a mistake. Trying to distract herself, Sophia threw herself into her work. But deep down, she knew that avoiding Thomas and the issues arising between them wasn't a solution. That night, when he invited her to dinner, she accepted, determined to discuss what she was truly feeling. They met at a quiet restaurant, where Thomas waited with a sincere smile, which she returned with a more restrained look. "I'm glad you came," he said, holding her hand across the table. "I felt we needed this time together, away from everything." She nodded, sighing before responding. "Thomas, I know how hard you're trying, and it means a lot to me, but I can't ignore what I feel knowing your family and Olivia seem so certain we're not meant for each other." Mentioning Olivia made her cheeks warm. The jealousy she tried to suppress was a constant presence, and the possibility of losing Thomas to someone who seemed to fit perfectly into his world made her insecure. Thomas took a deep breath, visibly affected by the mention of Olivia. "Sophia, I've already told you Olivia is part of my past. She can try all she wants, but you are the present and the future I've chosen for myself. My family, they have strong opinions, but you need to know it's my decision what I want, and what I want is you." His words were sincere, but a tinge of doubt lingered in her heart. "And if they keep opposing us, Thomas, how will you handle the pressure, the expectations?" she asked, trying to stay calm. He squeezed her hand firmly, his eyes determined. "I know it will be difficult, but I'm ready to face it. I'm willing to show that our love is stronger than any pressure. But I need you to believe in me, Sophia. I need you by my side." Tears welled up in Sophia's eyes, but she managed to smile. He was truly committed. And at that moment, she realized that, as challenging as it was, she loved him and was willing to try. If Thomas was ready to face their worlds, then so was she. "I'm with you, Thomas, but please, be honest with me about everything, always. I don't want to feel left out of your world," she said, with a hint of vulnerability. He nodded, kissing her hand with affection. "Always. You are everything that matters to me, and I won't let anyone come between us." However, the peace between them was short-lived. Days later, during a business event Thomas needed to attend, Sophia decided to support him by accompanying him, trusting that he would keep her close. But upon arriving at the venue, they noticed that Olivia was also there. And as if she had been waiting for this moment, Olivia made a point to approach them with a cold smile and confident demeanor. "Thomas, it's a pleasure to see you again," she said, with a look that seemed to ignore Sophia's presence entirely. "I hope you still remember the times we used to attend these events together." Thomas frowned, irritated by her attitude, but maintained his composure. "Olivia, my life has changed, and I hope you can understand that. I'm with Sophia now, and she's the person I want to share everything with." Olivia cast a discreet but intentional glance at Sophia. "Oh, of course, Sophia. It must be interesting for you to see what Thomas's world is like, right? I imagine it's not always easy to keep up," she said, in an apparently innocent tone, but filled with malice. Sophia felt her jealousy and insecurity intensify. It was clear that Olivia wanted to highlight the history she and Thomas shared, something Sophia could never replace. She squeezed Thomas's hand, but her discomfort was evident. "I think Thomas's world can be a challenge, yes, but we have something real," Sophia replied firmly. Though each word weighed heavily, seeing Sophia's distress, Thomas decided to end the conversation. "Olivia, I hope you can respect my relationship with Sophia, and I won't allow you or anyone else to interfere with it." With that, he led Sophia away, but the atmosphere between them had shifted. Throughout the remainder of the event, Sophia struggled to stay composed, but jealousy and insecurity overwhelmed her. Despite Thomas's efforts to include her, she felt she would never truly belong to that world. That night, back at the apartment, Sophia couldn't hold back her tears. She felt torn between her love for Thomas and the pain of constantly being reminded that she might never be enough in his world. "Thomas, I don't know if I can live with this constant reminder that I may never be enough," she said, tears streaming down her face. He embraced her, his eyes reflecting deep sadness. "Sophia, you are more than enough for me, and if I can't show you that, then I'm failing. I can't change the past, but I'm trying to build a future with you, something true and lasting. Tell me what I can do to make you feel that." She sighed, feeling the internal conflict. "I don't want you to change who you are, Thomas. I want to feel that what we have is stronger than these shadows of the past, stronger than your family's opinions. Because sometimes, I wonder if our love is enough to face all this." Thomas held her tightly, his voice choked. "Sophia, I'll do whatever it takes for you to believe you're the center of my world. I won't let anyone, not my family, not Olivia, shake what I feel for you." She looked into his eyes, feeling the sincerity and desperation of a man fighting all odds to keep her in his life. "Then let's fight together, Thomas. But please, be honest with me about everything, always. I don't want surprises. I don't want to discover something that could hurt me." He nodded, holding her even closer, as if sealing a silent promise between them. He knew the path would be challenging, but for the first time, he felt ready to face any obstacle as long as he had Sophia by his side. And that night, both understood that, despite all the barriers and challenges, the love they shared was a force that held them together, no matter how painful the journey might be. The days that followed were a mix of hope and tension for Thomas and Sophia. Although the love they shared was genuine, the emotional toll of Olivia's constant interference and the family's opposition began to leave deep marks on them both. Thomas felt increasingly pressured between his family commitments and his desire to build a future with Sophia, while she, even trying to believe in their strength, felt her place in his life was constantly threatened. Finally, Thomas made a decision. He needed to have a serious conversation with his family. If he wanted Sophia to believe in his love, he had to show her he was willing to face all obstacles, including his parents' disapproval. So, on a rainy afternoon, he arranged a meeting with his parents at their house, determined to make it clear that Sophia was part of his life and that he wouldn't give her up. Upon arriving, he found his father waiting in the study, wearing his usual controlled, cold expression. His mother, seated beside him, looked at him with a mix of expectation and displeasure. Thomas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility, but determined to proceed. "Mom, Dad, I need you to understand something once and for all," he began, his voice firm. "I love Sophia, and she is the woman I want to spend my life with. If you truly care about my happiness, I hope you can accept that." Thomas's father observed him in silence, his eyes hard and unyielding. Finally he spoke, his voice laden with coldness. "Thomas, we know you are an adult and capable of making your own decisions, but certain expectations come with your role in the company and in society. If you insist on this relationship with a florist, you must understand the consequences." Thomas felt his blood boil at the disdain in his father's tone. "Consequences? What kind of consequences? Because all I see is that you care more about appearances and status than about my happiness," he replied, anger evident in his voice. Thomas's mother intervened, her tone controlled but equally severe. "It's not about status, Thomas. It's about responsibility. You bear the family name, and that requires being with someone who understands the weight of that responsibility. Miss Wilson, as charming as she may be, simply isn't suitable for this." Thomas faced his parents, feeling the weight of their words. He had never felt so misunderstood, as if everything he wanted and everything he fought for was invisible to them. "And what do you think is suitable?" he repeated, struggling to remain calm. "That I give up the woman I love to uphold an image I don't even want. You think my life is about that?" His father looked at him, his gaze cold and unyielding. "This isn't just about image, Thomas. It's about knowing who you want to build your life with. Think about what you're risking. Business demands alliances and sometimes sacrifices. If you continue with this choice, you could risk everything. Some people and opportunities may not take you seriously. They'll judge your decisions. Your mother and I only want you to understand the impact of that." Thomas felt his stomach churn, anger surging within him. His father's view of love seemed calculating, cold, and it went against everything he and Sophia shared. "So to you, it's more important to protect business and alliances than to see me happy?" he asked, his voice low but filled with emotion. "Do you think this is easy for me? That I don't know how much I have to fight for Sophia? That I don't feel the weight of this? But I'm willing because I love her. And if you can't accept that, then maybe I don't need your support." His mother sighed, shaking her head in disappointment. "Thomas, we're only being realistic. No one is telling you to give up on your feelings. But if you choose to be with her, be prepared to face the consequences. Not everyone will be on your side." Her words weighed on him like a sentence. He felt he was being forced to choose between his family and the love of his life, as if each decision led him further from his own happiness. Without another word, Thomas left the house, his heart heavy and his mind swirling with anger and doubt. That same night, he went straight to Sophia's apartment, desperate for comfort, but also burdened by everything he was facing. When she opened the door, she immediately noticed his exhausted, tense expression. "Thomas, what happened?" she asked, worried. He sighed, running his hands over his face before looking at her with a gaze filled with despair and vulnerability. "I had a conversation with my parents, and they were clear. They don't approve of our relationship, Sophia. And they've made it clear they'll back me into a corner if I continue with you." Sophia's heart tightened, the insecurity she had tried so hard to overcome returning with full force. "And what do you want, Thomas?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Because I can't keep being the difficult choice, the one you have to justify or defend all the time." He stepped closer, holding her hands tightly. "I want you, Sophia. I just want to be by your side. But this is tearing me apart. I feel like I'm losing everything at once. My family, my parents." He hesitated, his eyes filling with deep sadness. "I just need you to know that despite everything, I love you and am trying with everything in me." She swallowed, fighting back tears. "Thomas, I know you love me, but is that enough? Because if I'm the reason you're going to lose your family, I don't know if I can live with that. I don't want to be the reason you break with the people who've always been there for you." Thomas shook his head, trying to convince both himself and her. "But you are my happiness, Sophia. I can give up anything except you." Sophia closed her eyes, allowing a few tears to escape. She desperately wanted to believe, but the uncertainty and fear consumed her. "Then promise me one thing, Thomas. Promise me that, no matter what happens, you will never regret this choice. Because I need to know you're here, because you want to be, not out of stubbornness or to prove something to others." He looked deeply into her eyes, his own reflecting a blend of love and fear. yet also a sincere determination. "I promise you, Sophia, if I'm here, it's because I want to live by your side, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this work." They embraced, their bodies conveying a mix of comfort and despair. But that night, both knew the road ahead was fraught with uncertainty, and the promise Thomas had made was an attempt to withstand the pressures and challenges, only growing stronger. As he left her later, Thomas felt the weight of everything he had said. He was committed to fighting for their love, but the conflict with his family, Olivia's persistent presence, and work pressures were forces testing him beyond anything he could have imagined. And deep down, he feared that, as much as he loved Sophia, the cost of this love was becoming too high for both of them. The air between Thomas and Sophia was thick with tension and fragility. Each promise and declaration seemed to add more weight to a relationship already burdened by conflicts. Even though Thomas was determined to be with her, the external pressures were pushing his heart and mind to their limits. Shortly after the difficult conversation with his parents, an important event came up in his career. Lancaster Enterprises was nominated for a prestigious business award, a recognition that could elevate the company's reputation and secure its place among industry leaders. This award ceremony was a unique opportunity, but the occasion demanded a formal presentation with the presence of the Lancaster family, who viewed the event as a reflection of the company's power and influence. Thomas knew this would be yet another test of his loyalty to the family, an expectation that felt like a burden. In discussing the event with him, his mother made it clear that family support hinged on his responsibility to uphold a strong and respectable image. Sophia, the florist, didn't fit into that image, and her presence would only add discomfort and judgment. When Thomas mentioned the event to Sophia, she noticed the conflict in his eyes. Though he was resolved to bring her along, she felt that her presence would only complicate things further. She knew his love was genuine, but she couldn't ignore the feeling of being an obstacle between him and his family. "Thomas, maybe it's best if you go alone," she said, her voice soft but full of pain. "I know how much this means to you and your family. I don't want to be the reason your night becomes even harder." He looked at her, surprised and uneasy. "Don't say that, Sophia. I want you with me. This isn't a victory if you're not by my side." She gave him a sad smile, understanding that her presence would only make things more complicated. "Thomas, you have a responsibility to your family, and I know how important this event is for all of you. If my being there will cause more problems, then I'd rather let you enjoy this moment without any extra burden." Thomas stared at her, feeling torn between his need to please his family and his desire to have her by his side. "Sophia, I don't want you to feel excluded. I want this night to be peaceful for both of us." She nodded, understanding his dilemma, but her heart was heavy with the prospect of being left out once again. On the night of the event, Thomas put on his finest suit and tried to focus on his speech. Yet, as he walked into the grand hall, he felt Sophia's absence like a physical void, as though an essential part of his happiness was missing. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't ignore the sense that, in yielding to his family's pressures, he was distancing himself from her. As he moved through the crowd, maintaining a flawless facade, Olivia appeared. Ever elegant and suggestive, she greeted him with a warm smile and, with her usual charm, remained at his side for much of the night. Thomas tried to keep a polite distance, but he knew Olivia's presence was no coincidence. She was clearly determined to take advantage of his vulnerability and Sophia's absence. "Thomas, you seem different tonight. Distant," she said, her tone suggestive. "I hope you know that, no matter what, I'll always be here if you need anything." He averted his gaze, irritated by her presence, but was aware that, given the significance of the evening, he couldn't afford to make a scene. He felt trapped, as if he were playing a part in a performance that no longer reflected who he was. However, Olivia's words lingered in his mind, disturbing him. She made sure to remind him how much easier life would be with someone who understood the weight of his responsibilities, someone who wouldn't require so much effort to fit in. As the night went on, Thomas found himself questioning if he was being selfish in wanting to have Sophia, while trying to keep her out of the demands and complications of his world. Meanwhile, Sophia sat alone in her apartment, trying to ignore the sadness she felt. She knew Thomas wanted her there, but the fact that he had yielded to his family's wishes left her deeply hurt. She felt guilty for questioning his love, knowing how much he cared for her and everything he was sacrificing to keep their relationship alive. That night, alone and lost in thought, Sophia felt the pain of falling in love with someone whose world was the opposite of her own. And love, however intense, seemed like a constant battle between being together and protecting each other from the suffering that came with it. With tears streaming down her face, she began to question if she was holding on to something that, despite being real, was causing them both so much pain. When Thomas arrived at her apartment later that night, he found her sitting quietly, her face marked by exhaustion and sadness. He tried to smile, but instantly saw something had changed between them. "How was the event?" she asked, her voice weak, trying to stay composed. "It was what it needed to be, but it wasn't the same without you," he replied, sitting next to her. She took a deep breath, then looked at him, her voice trembling. "Thomas, I don't know if I'm ready to be part of all this. I feel like no matter how hard we try, there will always be someone trying to pull us apart." He tried to take her hands, but Sophia pulled away slightly, struggling to contain her emotions. "I'm starting to think we're hurting each other, Thomas. I don't want your family to turn against you because of me, but I don't know if I can bear this anymore." The pain in his eyes was unmistakable, yet he knew her words held a truth he had been trying to ignore. "Sophia, please, don't say that. I promised I'd do whatever it takes to make this work." She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But the question is it worth it to you? You're giving up so much, facing so much. Aren't you forcing yourself to hold on to something that's only breaking us?" Thomas felt the ground fall away beneath him. The thought of losing Sophia was unbearable, yet he was beginning to realize how much the struggle for their relationship was wearing them both down. "I don't want to lose you, Sophia. I truly believe our love is stronger than all of this," he murmured, desperate. She leaned forward, touching his face gently. "I know you love me, Thomas, but sometimes love isn't enough when it brings so much pain, so much sacrifice." In that moment, they both realized that the love that bound them was caught between the reality of their worlds and the dream of being together. Embraced, they stayed in silence, feeling the weight of a choice neither of them wanted to make, yet one the situation seemed to demand. Thomas and Sophia had reached the breaking point of what they could endure. Despite the sincere love they shared, the weight of expectations, judgments, and the differences between their worlds had become overwhelming. Their relationship, once hopeful and strong, was now trapped between love and the pain of trying to make everything work. That morning, as Sophia worked in the flower shop, her mind drifted, tangled in a whirlwind of doubts and fears. She remembered the nights by Thomas's side, the plans they had made together, but the image of his parents and Olivia's persistent attempts to win him back haunted her, reminding her that their love seemed nearly impossible. The love they shared, however intense, was demanding a price she feared she couldn't pay. Later that day, Thomas appeared at the shop. He looked weary, as if he were carrying the burden of months of conflicts and sacrifices, but there was a resolve in his eyes. He had spent the morning thinking of Sophia, longing to be with her, but he knew she was suffering, and that perhaps the best thing he could do was to set her free from that suffering. When she saw him walk in, her heart tightened. She sensed this conversation wouldn't be easy, but she also knew it was something they had been avoiding. She approached him, and for a moment, the silence between them spoke more than any words. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice soft but full of sadness. He sighed, running a hand over his face before answering. "I needed to see you, Sophia. I needed to understand what we're doing to each other. I love you more than anything, but I don't know if we're able to make each other happy." She looked away, feeling tears gather. She knew he was being honest, which only made it more painful. "Thomas, I tried to be strong. I tried to adapt, but every time I feel we're getting closer, something pulls us apart. I feel exhausted, like I'm holding on to something that's only hurting us," she said, her voice breaking. He watched her in silence, his eyes reflecting the same pain she felt. "I'm exhausted too, Sophia, but what hurts most is the thought of losing you. I've never felt this way about anyone, and it's like part of me is dying at the thought of letting you go." Her heart broke as she heard his words, but she knew they had to face reality with strength. Maybe what we feel isn't enough to face everything we're going through, Thomas. Sometimes love just isn't enough to keep two people together. He took her hand, his touch filled with a mixture of desperation and resignation. "So, this is it. Are we really giving up?" he asked in a whisper, his voice trembling. Sophia looked into his eyes, knowing she was about to make a decision that would change their lives forever. "I think we need time. Time to understand who we are, what we want, and if we're ready to love each other despite all these difficulties," she said, holding back tears. "Maybe this love needs space to grow so that we can live it without letting it destroy us." Thomas nodded, even though his heart was shattered. He knew she was right, that their love was trapped in a cycle of pain and expectations, and that maybe time was the only remedy that could bring them some peace. "I love you, Sophia. And if this is the space we need, I'll respect it. But know that I will never give up on us," he said, making a silent promise. They embraced, holding each other tightly with a mix of longing and desperation, as if saying goodbye to a part of themselves. When they finally let go, Sophia felt that their love was still alive, but that it needed to be protected from the pain that the world around them kept imposing. That night was one of the loneliest of their lives. Lying in bed, Sophia thought back to every moment they had shared, the promises, the laughter, and felt the void left by his absence. But despite everything, a part of her felt a strange peace, as if she were finally giving her heart a chance to heal and regain the balance she had lost. Thomas, on the other hand, spent the night wide awake. He felt lost without her, and every minute reminded him of what he was willing to sacrifice to keep her from suffering any longer. He knew their love was real, but he also understood that perhaps they needed this time to grow stronger as individuals. In the days that followed, the absence of each other weighed heavily on them both. Sophia tried to focus on her flower shop, but each customer, each bouquet, seemed to carry a piece of his memory. Thomas, deeply immersed in work, tried to convince himself he was doing the right thing, but the emptiness in his chest lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't leave him alone. Yet deep down, they both knew that the love they shared was something unique, something that, despite all the challenges, continued to be the force that made them feel alive. And so Thomas and Sophia lived their days apart, each holding on to the hope that time would guide them back to the love they had built together. Because true love, the kind that endures all trials, might just survive the suffering and perhaps one day be reborn, stronger and more real than ever. The days without Thomas felt long and empty for Sophia. No matter how hard she tried to stay busy at the flower shop, her heart kept replaying moments with him, their late-night conversations, the sparkle in his eyes when he talked about their future, the promises that made their love seem so real and unbreakable. Deciding to separate was the most painful choice she'd ever made, but Sophia believed it was the only way to preserve what they had left. However, time and distance couldn't erase his presence. Every customer coming in with a romantic request, every bouquet she arranged, held a vivid memory of Thomas, quietly accompanying her even in his absence. Without knowing it, he was going through similar feelings. Thomas, back at his office, tried to focus on new projects, immersing himself in work to stay focused. Yet the absence of Sophia drained the color from his life, the brightness and hope she brought to everything. The promise of love he'd made to her still burned in his heart, but the pain of separation made him wonder if he could really live without her. Every day reminded him of what he still had, but also of what he'd lost when he let Sophia go. One particularly silent evening, Thomas realized he didn't want to continue with this distance. His love for her was undeniable, and each day that passed made him more certain that he couldn't live without Sophia. He knew that to win her back, he'd have to face whatever it took and prove that he was ready to put their relationship above any family expectation, above any pride. Determined to act, he set his work aside and headed to the flower shop. His heart beat faster with each step, as if this were his last chance to express everything he felt and, perhaps, recover what they'd lost. When he arrived, the shop was empty, but through the window, He saw her arranging a new bouquet with the same delicate touch that had captivated him since their first meeting. His heart tightened with the ache of missing her, and he stepped inside, feeling both anxious and vulnerable. Hearing him enter, Sophia looked up, and her heart raced when she saw Thomas standing there. A mix of surprise and emotion swept over her, yet fear of getting hurt again held her reaction back. "Thomas," she whispered, trying to hide the whirlwind of feelings his presence brought. He took a few steps toward her, his eyes full of love and longing. "Sophia, I know I hurt you. I know our relationship was full of challenges, but the only thing I've learned in this time apart is that I'm nothing without you. I tried to convince myself that the distance was best, that I was protecting you from a difficult life, but I realized that choice has only left us more lost." She listened in silence, the pain still alive, yet the love just as present. Thomas continued, his voice filled with emotion. "I need you, Sophia. You gave meaning to everything, and since you left, nothing makes sense. I don't care about others' opinions. I don't care what society or my family thinks. I just want to live this love with you, however it is." Sophia felt tears fall, but fear held her back. "Thomas, as much as I love you, things between us have been so hard. I'm still afraid that if we try again, we'll end up hurting even more." He nodded, understanding her pain, but was resolved to fight for their love. "I know I made mistakes, and I'm not here to promise a life without problems, but I'm here to promise that this time, I'll put you first. I'm willing to face anything, as long as you're by my side. Give me this chance, Sophia. I can't live without you anymore." Sophia's heart was torn. She knew she loved him, that he was everything she wanted, but the fear of getting hurt remained strong. Yet the light in his eyes, the sincerity in his voice, made her consider taking that leap of faith. "Thomas, I love you, but we need to be sure we're ready to face everything together. Truly," she said, her voice trembling. He held her firmly, his eyes shining with a new determination. "I don't want to be apart anymore, Sophia. No matter what happens, I'll be by your side. There's nothing I want more than this. Please, let me show you that we're ready to live this love." She felt her heart calm, as if the storm was finally clearing. She looked at him with a timid smile, and for the first time in a long while, allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, the love they shared was strong enough to overcome everything. "Then, let's try again," she said softly, feeling both vulnerable and hopeful. He smiled, pulling her into an embrace filled with longing and emotion. Both knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but that night, holding each other close, they felt ready to face anything as long as they were together. The love Thomas and Sophia had rediscovered felt stronger than ever. After that night in the flower shop, they decided they would face all obstacles together, without hiding behind insecurities or external pressures. This decision gave them both renewed strength, a confidence they had never felt before. They were determined to build a life together, one that was authentic, even if it meant defying the world around them. In the days that followed, Thomas took a decisive step. He spoke with his family once more, making it clear that Sophia was his choice and that he wouldn't change his mind, regardless of the consequences. His father initially responded with the same resistance, but as he saw his son's unshakable determination, he realized that opposition wouldn't weaken their love. Over time, Mr. Lancaster's heart began to soften, and he recognized that Sophia, with her courage and genuine love, was exactly what his son needed to be happy. However, there was still one person who would try to interfere: Olivia. Even with Thomas's efforts to leave her in the past, she insisted on remaining present. One afternoon, Olivia showed up at the office, claiming she needed to discuss a shared project with Thomas. He agreed to hear her out, but made it clear that nothing she said would change his commitment to Sophia. "Thomas, do you really believe that a woman like her can handle everything your life requires?" Olivia asked, her voice dripping with disdain. "Don't you see that sooner or later she'll walk away?" Thomas took a deep breath, realizing that nothing would convince her otherwise. Instead of responding with anger, he remained calm. "Olivia, maybe you'll never understand, but the love I feel for Sophia is unlike anything I've ever experienced. The life I want isn't just about status and conventions. What I desire is a true love, and that's what I found with her." Seeing that she had lost her last chance to win him back, Olivia left without saying another word. Thomas felt at last that he was free to live his relationship with Sophia without shadows from the past. He knew their love was real, and as challenging as the road ahead might be, they were ready to face it together. When he told Sophia about the encounter, she felt relieved and secure. For the first time, she saw in his eyes an unwavering certainty that nothing would come between them. That same night, Thomas and Sophia talked about the future. He proposed to her, simply and sincerely, in her apartment, surrounded by flowers and soft light. There were no grand gestures, no audience, just the two of them, in an intimate and genuine moment. "Sophia, you're the one who changed my life, who showed me what really matters. I don't want a life without you. Let's get married and build the life we've always dreamed of, no matter what the world thinks," he said, holding her hands, his eyes shining with emotion. Sophia smiled, tears streaming down her face as she nodded. She felt safe, finally ready to give herself completely to this love, knowing they had overcome every obstacle. "Yes, Thomas, I want to live this life by your side, every step of the way," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. And so, amidst tears and smiles, they embraced, certain that their love could overcome any challenge. Months later, Thomas and Sophia were married in a simple ceremony, surrounded by close friends and, surprisingly, his family, who, witnessing the strength of their love, came to accept the union with newfound respect. Thomas's mother and father, though hesitant at first, realized that this relationship was exactly what he needed to find happiness. In time, they began to appreciate Sophia's kindness and determination. The couple moved into an apartment together, a space that reflected a balance between their worlds, Sophia's lightness and simplicity, mingling with Thomas's elegance and sophistication. The flower shop remained an essential part of their lives, and Thomas, whenever he could, would join Sophia there, finding unexpected joy in each bouquet and customer they served together. In the years that followed, they faced new challenges, but with a love strengthened by past trials, they learned to embrace their differences, accepting that true love isn't about perfection, but about respect, sacrifice, and commitment. With each obstacle, they remembered everything they had overcome to be together, which bound them even closer. Sophia continued to cultivate the beauty of flowers, and Thomas found in her the peace and true happiness he had always sought. Together, they built a life based on trust, partnership, and a love that, despite everything, triumphed over every barrier. And so Thomas and Sophia, after a journey filled with challenges and transformations, discovered that true love isn't about avoiding hardships, but enduring them and flourishing, stronger and deeper with every new season.